Okay, we're all set.
Ready? Okay. Being that we don't have a chair and a vice chair yet, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Town clerk, take a roll call.
Okay. Katie Davis. Here. Ben Heislop.
Here.
John Ryan.
Here.
Virginia Standish. Here. Howard Warren.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. I guess the first order of business is to elect a chair and a vice chair. So I think it would be appropriate if one of you wanted to make a motion among the others to. So who was quick? I think Howard beat you by a tad of a second.
I'd like to nominate Virginia as chair.
I'll second that. Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor to nominate Virginia Standish as chair. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, ayes have it. And vice chair, you want to take over to the vice chair?
Oh, jeez.
Motion for vice
Well,
chair?
Mr. Ryan would like to make a motion.
Yeah, I think one of the most critical issues we've got is Okeechobee Boulevard. And both Beck and Katie represent interests on Okeechobee, so, you know, I feel, you know, either one of them that's willing to accept the nomination, I'd be willing to nominate them.
Okay, we'll pick one.
So could you say that, John, could you just speak? I
You
couldn't.
need to speak up.
Okay. I said I thought one of the most important issues was Okeechobee Boulevard, and both Beck Heislop and Katie Davis are very involved in Okeechobee Boulevard in different ways. So either one of them, I think, would be a good vice chair. And
I nominate Katie Davis.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. I believe it's a good neutral chairperson, someone new to a committee. We'll go with that.
Okay. You want to ask for a vote?
I asked for the vote, or
Yeah.
just I'll ask for the vote for Katie as vice chair.
Aye.
No opposed, we have it, okay. All right, let me, Madam Chair, the next item is the presentation of legal requirements. As you know, every time a new board or committee is formed, we try to have the town attorneys go ahead and just give you a quick overview of those items that you're going to need to know in the proper conduct of your role on this committee. And so with that, from the town attorney's office is Stacy Wanger, and she's going to give you a legal review.
This one's the one where it's sunshine, which is at the top.
Says it's not installed on the desk.
Did you see it there?
Yeah.
It's on here.
Is there a problem, Carl?
I see it installed, but it says it's not. She can
Windows
use
of
it.
technology, sorry folks. because there's some-
Reed, and she can use it right from that drive if she wants.
Hi, good evening. We just want to go through a brief sunshine law presentation with you as a new board. The sunshine law is found in Article 1, Section 24 of the Florida Constitution and Sections 286.011 Florida statutes. It provides that all meetings of any collegial body of the executive branch or of a municipality at which official acts are to be taken or at which official business of such body is to be transacted or discussed shall be open and noticed to the public. So the requirements of the Sunshine Law provide that meetings of public boards must be open to the public, reasonable notice of such meetings must be given, and minutes of the meetings must be taken. The purpose of the Sunshine Law is to ensure that decisions by public bodies are made in an open forum accessible to members of the public. Decisions for purposes of the Sunshine Law are official actions, but they can include recommendations, discussions, and deliberations amongst the board. As far as who's subject to the Sunshine Law, any board or commission of the state or municipality, the Sunshine Law applies equally to both elected and appointed boards and commissions. The judiciary and the legislature have exempted themselves from the Sunshine Law, but the Sunshine Law applies to all the members of this board. As far as what a meeting is that's subject to the Sunshine Law, it's any gathering, whether it be formal or informal, of two or more members of the same collegial body, at which they discuss any matter which it's foreseeable that action will be taken by the board at some future point in time. It can be any discussion amongst two members of this board about a topic that may come before you.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes,
A lot of us go to town council meetings.
yes.
If a topic is raised, and there's more than one of the members of this board at that meeting, can we say anything, or do we have to be?
You can speak as a member of the public to the town council, but you cannot speak directly amongst yourselves. So while it's in that forum, it's okay, but if two of you are walking down the street having a conversation about something that would come before this board,
Because that's another official public meeting.
right, even though it's not a meeting, it becomes a meeting just because there are two of you on the board talking about public business.
Thank you.
Question.
Yes.
In such an instance, are we supposed to refrain from mentioning anything that was discussed in this room when we're at a council meeting?
No, it's not required. I mean, council meetings are subject to Sunshine Law as well, and there will be video and minutes taken, and it's advertised to the public. The bigger concern is those conversations that really go on amongst yourselves in private, out of the eyes of the public. The Sunshine Law also applies to written correspondence and email. One-way communication is okay. One board member can send an email to the entire board about a topic. Do not hit reply all in response. It can just be an email going out. There can not be a response from any board members about it. It's
So,
pretty,
wait a minute.
yes,
We can send an email to all the board members, but there just can be no dialogue or response, right?
correct. It's the interaction that creates a violation. A one-way communication, if you had a proposal or those types of things is okay, but there cannot be a back and forth conversation amongst the board members.
So interaction and dialogue is the problem.
For the most part, yes, about a topic that will come before you, or that's foreseeable that may come before you.
But we could send for something that might come before the board. I mean, so many things can come before the board.
Right,
If we had a thought or a question that we were going to address to the town attorney,
yes,
could we send to the town attorney and copy all the members of the board?
yes. But the board members could then not communicate
respond.
about that question.
Would the attorney's response, if he directed it to the party sending the question, that could be sent to everybody as a background clarification without it being a dialogue?
Not by you necessarily,
Right,
but
by the
by,
attorney.
yes,
Okay.
yes ma'am.
My question is, we have a community blog occasionally where people interacts, should we refrain from posting on the blog? How does that?
I recommend refraining from posting about, again, topics coming before you. If there's other issues and those types of things,
Right.
but anything that's really within the scope of this board, the back and forth comments and those types of things. You also end up with public records preservation issues when it's done in a certain form. Yes.
So I can send an email to everybody saying, I think we should all wear green uniforms, and the attorney can communicate back.
Your communication.
We will consider that, and then somebody else can say, I think we should consider red uniforms, or they can't say that.
Well, uniforms wouldn't come before the board.
Yeah, but I'm
I
just
know.
taking a simplistic example.
You can if you don't reply to your email. Now, you can send another email to everybody
Saying,
that isn't a reply to your email.
I think we should wear.
I think we should wear
uniforms.
purple.
Okay.
Then that's legal.
All right, that's.
Am I correct in that assumption?
It depends on the topic. We try to keep it back and forth. If there's one
I'm wearing
blanket
shorts,
email,
that's what I'm wearing.
if there's one blanket email that goes out, we really just recommend that you don't respond. If you have questions, to either go through the town manager or through the town attorney, who can address those questions and concerns directly with you.
Where I'm coming from with this, if any of us all of a sudden have what we believe personally is a brilliant idea that is basically thinking outside the box, and we would like to throw it out there for everybody to have it mulling around in your head, so when we get to this meeting, it's not all of a sudden, wow, I never thought of that before. They've already had a chance to think about it, and when it is brought up, in this case, say, by me, okay, then people can already start to say, I thought about that bit since your comment, and I think it's a bad idea for this reason or a good idea for that reason. That's where I'm going with this. And
Again,
that's
it will be
fine.
one-way communication from you.
We just can't
Right.
say nothing.
But you can think about it for a week.
Exactly.
All right.
I have a question for Mr. Putney. Are the committee members free to contact the town attorney on their own at any time?
Not generally, they should direct that through the staff. And we'll talk about the town attorney's participation a little bit later in the meeting.
But we would have the same privilege of not addressing it to Mike Cirillo, just addressing it to you and Rocky and everybody else. And if we had agenda topics that we were interested in going to the next meeting, we individually
Come
give
to us
those to
when we
you.
prepare the agenda,
Okay.
we'll take care of that.
Okay. The Sunshine Law applies to written correspondence and email as well. Again, the one-way communication is okay. It's the interaction that creates the Sunshine Law violation. Again, third parties who are not members of the board should not be used to exchange information between the members. So it shouldn't be every person here going to Mr. Putney to have him come back and tell each of you what your statement on this topic is. Utilizing someone else for a purpose that you couldn't have that communication yourselves violates the Sunshine Law as well. There are some exceptions to the Sunshine Law, but they generally do not apply to boards of this nature. It's attorney-client discussions for settlements. Any members elected to boards before you're sworn in are also subject to the Sunshine Law. As far as violations of the Sunshine Law, any member who violates the Sunshine Law can be found guilty of a non-criminal infraction punishable by a fine of up to $500. And anyone who knowingly violates the Sunshine Law is guilty of a misdemeanor of the second degree. There are additional penalties that may apply, which could result in suspension or removal from your office or as a member of this board. Our most severe example is a county commission chairman who violated the Sunshine Law and was sentenced to 60 days in jail, as well as fines and court costs. In addition to the public meetings portion, there's also Florida Public Records Law, which applies to members of this board. A public record is all documents, papers, letters, anything made or received pursuant to a law or an ordinance in connection with the transaction of official business that will come before this board. So those emails that you send that are related to board business are a public record. Any notes that you may take, or if the purpose of a document that you prepared is in connection with business to come before this board, may also be subject to a public record request. Our office really warns members of boards against using text messaging when they're communicating about these messages, about board items. There's a huge problem as far as being able to obtain copies of those text messages and storage of those in response to a public records request, whereas email, you can go back and find what was sent. There's not the same tracking mechanism and storage for text messages. As far as who responds to a public records request, the town clerk has that responsibility. And anyone who desires to do so has the ability to request and inspect public records. There's no legitimate need or special purpose requirement. Public records laws are narrowly construed, or liberally construed in favor of open government, and exceptions thereto are very narrowly construed. So the whole goal is that the business of this board is done out in the open for the public to see, and that any discussions pertaining to those items are open and available for the public. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
So,
Are the videos going to be on the town website?
Yes, it will be.
Via YouTube. On YouTube.
Anyone else? 2C? We're on 2C?
Yeah, so 2C. Before we do that, though, why don't we drop down if we can to 2D, and let's do the meetings and get that.
Yes,
get that set
everyone
up
has
on
a
the way,
strong
and then
interest
we'll
in
come
that.
back and we'll do that, so.
Okay, we're topic setting of next date, meeting is open. Any comments?
is there any possibility we could change the seating
How
arrangement? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Where we will.
Where we can see,
We're gonna be getting nameplates
Board.
and all that.
chair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see what we're.
Well, I mean, it's, you're at a disadvantage
So
because,
you mean sitting in the middle?
well, you can sit where they're sitting, and this
No,
way
no,
you can see who's raising their hands for comment.
I pay attention,
All
I'll
right.
sit in the middle, or maybe, actually, it's easier if I sit here and I'm actually watching.
The issue with the meetings is we'd probably like to set a monthly meeting, a certain time and date. And then I think for the first 4 to 6 months, we're probably okay with one meeting a month. We'll have to see how we're progressing and how much more material we have to go through for the last 4 or 5 months before the committee sunsets or it gets extended, whatever the case may be. We might need to do meetings twice a month. The dates that you have to be careful of in terms of trying to set your normal meeting time is the town council meets the first Tuesday and the third Tuesday if they're going to have some business on the second Tuesday. They sometimes hold that for workshops and special meetings and things like that. The planning commission meets on the second Thursday if they have either business items to transact, so that date is out. And the finance, accounting, and advisory committee, they meet on the fourth Monday.
Do they?
And the roadways meet on the fourth Wednesday of the month. So you get to pick every other day from that, except those. Those are already taken.
Well, you got the third Tuesday at 8 in the morning.
So we have basically, so what you're saying is the first week, you're saying the first week we have Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. The second week we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday. The third week we have every day except Tuesday, and the fourth week we have Tuesday and Thursday and Friday.
Water Control
Howard-
District,
Howard.
second Monday.
Yeah, Water Control District is the second Monday, so
Okay.
take that into account for Mr. Ryan.
Second Monday?
Yeah.
Okay, Howard?
And due to my business, Wednesdays are not
All
possible.
Wednesdays are out.
Well, you're here today.
Yeah, I know, but
Okay.
it's
Anyone
slow.
else? Anyone else unavailable? Flexible?
I'm pretty flexible.
I'm the one who right now I'm flexible. My schedule may be that I am not available for right now I'm currently flexible. I cannot speak to the future though. Going through transition. I would be, I could say 5 o'clock possibly. I could start, if we want to set the next meeting date already. There was some comments, Howard, you were having a comment about time though before?
Right,
Well, as far as the date, how about third Thursday? That seems like that's open.
Third Thursday?
Sounds good.
That's good for everybody?
Oh,
Third Thursday, and then time, anyone have suggestions, Howard?
well, I mean, I would like it as early as possible. I mean, I could be here at noon, but I mean, depends how it works with other people's schedules. I mean, I know Beck and I talked briefly about that, and I think he was looking for something preferably not at night. But then again, it depends how it works in with everybody else's schedule, and including town staff. I know it would save the town quite a bit of money if
we did
all
it
you
today.
guys didn't
Well,
do
we
it.
actually, it's not good for the town staff during the day, because that's taking us away from the office, a good portion of us.
Right.
But I guess a compromise could be, if you're concerned about night meetings, we could try to do it maybe sometime like start at 4, 4:35, and then try to go till 7 or so.
That would work, but earlier in the day, it's tough for me.
Yeah, it was late afternoon.
Yeah.
I'd like to keep it to 5, only because you close at 4, correct? And if there's something to overlay, I'd like to shoot for 5, only because again, I don't know what my schedule will be. If I find out that 4 is good, I will certainly say, let's do 4, 4:30, but I'd like to keep it at 5, so I don't have us changing it.
That's good.
All right, so what we'll try to do is we'll try to start these next couple meetings, these next couple months, we'll shoot for the third Thursday at 5 o'clock. And generally, they're going to probably be in this room, we'll probably reserve this room.
That would be the 21st.
I believe so, on the calendar, that's probably right.
We're prepared.
Howard?
Are we going to get email notifications like we did for this meeting?
I'll email you.
You look at the agenda packet.
Just don't respond.
Yeah, don't reply. Mr.
Okay.
Brett?
Yes.
I thought you were doing
No. Third
We'll
Thursday.
try to get you the agenda out as many days in advance of the meeting as we can. And that's completed to the next item whenever you're ready, Madam Chair.
Okay, so third Thursday, 5 p.m., which is the 21st for the next meeting. So now we're back to 2C.
Okay. Yes, we'll try to have the agendas out, as I said, as close to a week as possible, to give you more time. The way we're going to approach that is, what we'd like to do is, when we provide you the information and material you're going to go over that night, we're going to try to either have commentary and information for you with the items, or we'll do it at the meeting at night with the verbal update. It'll just depend on how fast we're able to move. As you know, the way the town council approached it, they decided to let the town management company handle it from their work authorization. So the staff you see here, let me just review. I mean, you're going to always have the town clerk or one of our other staff will be here. I'll probably be at every meeting. Jim Fleischman, who works for the management company, will also be here on and off, possibly with Greg and Garrett. I do want to assure you that Jim and I probably have more years' experience than we want to cop to on this, but before I got into my life as a city manager, I was a planning planner and a planning director. I think both of us are AICPs, and we have a lot of experience, so I think we know what we're talking about when we advise you. When the issues get extremely legal, then we'll probably look to have the town attorney also here, but it won't be at every meeting. It'll just be when we think it's necessary to have him here. I think we'll get his input, so that we'll be able to indicate that to you. At the next meeting, I do want to go over the ordinance, the resolution that created the committee. There's not a lot of information there, but we'll go over that just in terms of some of the rules and things that are in there. And we thought we could get started tonight, and it looks like we are going to have enough time to do it. We do have 2 items that we brought before you from the original bunch of items that we I first presented to council for their review. And the first one is Article 170, which is special exception uses. And if we have enough time tonight, the second article is 75 non-conforming uses, structures and plots. Now,
Mark, I have a question on what you expect from us tonight then, since this is our first meeting. Are you expecting us to make decisions tonight, simply read through? What is our purpose tonight?
well, we're going to give you at least an update on the first one for sure. It's going to be what you all are comfortable with. Sue had sent you copies of the ULDC via email. I don't know if you all saw them.
The only copy I got was the one from today. Or that's what's up for
The
today.
Article 170 and 170.
Right, but did we not send them the Unified Land Development Code and control?
Did we get it in the mail or was it an email?
No, she's never received.
Okay.
It's on the website. It's
I'll
on
have
the
to look.
website.
Yeah, they wanted copies.
Copy of the whole code book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You sent the whole DOBC?
No.
No, I sent the article.
This 170 of this.
What we'll do is we'll make
Yes.
sure that you get copies by the next meeting of the entire book.
Yeah.
Okay, right away.
You can, it's in there. It's on our website as well.
Yeah, but if they don't have a hard copy, they need computers if we're talking about, we need that.
They want a hard copy bound in the book?
It'd be bound, I mean, we can just give them copies, you know.
Okay.
Okay, Howard has a question.
I think we need to get this decided now, and that is, if we're really making good headway, and the clock strikes 7, is somebody gonna say, sorry, time's over, let's go home? Or if we see we're really going to accomplish something, are we gonna stay an extra 15, 20 minutes, half hour? We need to get that straight now, because, I mean, I would be in favor of it, but I don't know how you feel, or the chair feels, or what have you. I certainly wouldn't want to bring up new subjects, okay, but if we're really getting somewhere, I mean, are we going to just get up and leave it because it's 7?
From our standpoint, I would say it's not going to matter to staff. I think it's going to be the rules you set as a committee as to how long you want to go. I mean, if, you know, you're moving along, like you're saying, making a lot of progress, you want to go to 10 o'clock, it's a 5-hour meeting. It's a long meeting, but if you want to, we'll do it. If you want to set 9 as a limit, you know, we can do that, or, I mean, I'm sorry, 7 as a limit, we can do that too, whatever, you know, you want.
How about, I hear what Howard's saying, how about we set 2 hours as a limit, and then when we get to that point, say, okay, guys, I think into the next 30 minutes we can wrap this up, take a little vote, go on our way.
So we will pace ourselves at the 2-hour mark is what you're suggesting. At the 2-hour mark, we take a consensus of who has time to continue for the evening?
I think that would be something.
Does that seem?
Sure.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, it may change from meeting to meeting based
We have a
on.
public
I'm
comment.
just wondering when public gets to say something regarding any of this.
Mark,
Well,
do we have public?
we have public comments down at number 3.
In reference to time being at 5, you have to realize that some of the people who are affected the most by these ULDCs are working, number 1. Number 2, some of these issues are huge issues. And if you expect to really get through these things in 2 hours and hear the public, I don't know how much you're going to get done. Number 3, this meeting is not, as I can currently see, properly advertised. The agenda wasn't made available on the website, nor has been the agenda for my meeting tomorrow. I don't, honestly, I don't understand how is the public supposed to be involved in helping this committee make proper decisions with the way things are being set up?
I think, let me address one of the main issues, is that you asked about how much time, and that was Howard's concern also. And I don't think we said we're cutting off at 2 hours. We just simply, we're not saying we're going to cut off at 2 hours. In my understanding, we're saying at 2 hours, we're going to stop and say we need to keep continuing, so we know if we have to contact someone or what we need to do, we can stop and take a break at the 2 hour point. Is that my understanding, what we're trying to say here?
To see where we stand.
And how much further we need to go for the evening. We're not cutting off at, we're not saying we're cutting off at 2 hours. We're taking that, a break at 2 hours. Mr. Ryan?
Also, Mark, I think you did a good job of, giving us background materials with recommendations. Hopefully, you'll use your knowledge and judgment of the issues to create realistic agendas so that we don't have topics that are, you know, gonna be impossible to do in this amount of time.
Right, it has to be paced.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
I think in this particular case, because we're only talking 12 meetings with an incredible volume of work, I think it's really important for the public to be put on notice that they are free to give all the input they wish to any of the 5 of us in written form to bring up here during the meeting in this forum. So they don't necessarily have to come here and speak their piece. Any of us can speak for them, saying, as far as this particular code, I have somebody that says that this is not fair, it should be written this way instead of that way. I think that needs to be publicized, that that is open to any resident in Loxahatchee Groves, and that might dispel some of the negative feelings about.
I think things could be mentioned to you, but I don't know if that could be a substitute for somebody who wants to get up. I mean, obviously, you gotta get, you got.
Of course, but they're not going to be able to say, I had no way to get my feelings known.
Well, as an example, the ULDCs are quite intense, and so you're saying that the public is expected to sit here for the 5 or 6 hours and make their comment at the end. I mean, how should we get, I understand how it usually works. We all sit through most of these meetings and make our comments, but for something like this, what can we do to accommodate the public?
Well, what you can do is you put the public up first. But I wouldn't recommend mixing the public in with your deliberations, or you're not going to get a lot done. That's not going to work. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, Mark, if you're going to be getting input from us and setting the agenda and pacing this, following up on what Nina was saying, if you publicize on the website the topic that we're going to be covering at the meeting, whatever articles, maybe suggest that the public input to the committee members be focused on that article or code item or.
Yeah, we put a note. You know, we put the whole agenda in, so we can put a note.
Because otherwise you're going to have, you know, people, you know, with 20 different things that concern them, and none of them are the topic for the next meeting, and then when that topic comes around, you know, they're not making timely comments.
Anyone else from the public?
Back to the chair.
Yeah, there's another way that I suppose we could do it. When we have applications come in for development, the way that we do it is staff makes a presentation, the applicant makes a presentation, and then the public has a chance to comment specifically on that item. So maybe as opposed to having all the public comments be on a separate item at the end. For example, under special exception, we could have a canned format where staff presentation, board member comments from the public on that item. So that way we can have the comments focused on that item and give the public a chance to comment when the item is hot and is being discussed. That's just no real comment.
But, I have a question. If we discuss topic A, and my question, I guess, to you is, if we say, okay, we should say topic A needs to be changed to B, does that get presented to the council before we get to the next one, or how does that?
There's been no determined method of action at this point. I wouldn't think that we want to wait until you complete your
That would take forever.
Yeah, I think what probably I'll do is provide them quarterly updates, and that way it's manageable. They can see what we've done for that first 3 months and how many issues you've addressed, that kind of thing, and then we'll go from there.
It's because I think if we wanted to change something within something, and it's published so that the public can say, whoa, wait a second, did you guys consider this, that, and the other? It needs to be thrown back at us to go, hey, did you consider X, Y, and Z? And then we can go, ooh, wait a second, we never even thought about that. Then we can discuss it. So to where it's not just, we're a board of dictators here, we're changing A to B, and hopefully the council listens to what we're saying, and then they go with it, and all of a sudden, there's 5, 6, 10, 20 people go, did you ever even consider that it rains in Florida? Well, no, I never thought about that. So, you know, I think that's important, so I think our discussion should be put out there. There's 4 weeks before we get to the next meeting. People can say whatever to you guys, so the town, or the staff can come to us and say, hey, this is what some of your neighbors are saying. Do you guys want to reconsider this? Because, and I think we should. I think that's
Okay.
over here.
Mark?
On that particular point? Well,
Now the question is, how many times do we do that?
yeah, you gotta be careful with that. I think once you all take actions, you don't wanna start going back and reinventing the wheel. I mean, everybody has an opinion, they can express it. And I think, you know, once you kind of vote on the matter, unless it's something that's really an egregious mistake or something like that, then maybe you can go back and look at it. But I think you're gonna start to run into getting your work, problems and getting your work done if you have too much of that occur.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's
Go
get
ahead, go ahead,
Howard
Howard, go ahead.
This is separate, we'll finish that issue first.
out.
Can we at least just bring it up and say, okay, I don't think that's worth considering, and then just make a vote and go on?
Let me say this, let me make a suggestion. How about we start that, because we're brand new to this, how about we start with that concept and that approach for the first, let's say, 2 meetings, and then evaluate how we're doing? And you can tell us how we're going through this. Let's try that approach. Do I need to ask for a second on that?
Well, you should have passed the gavel. You're making the motion, so.
Well, there is no gavel.
Then pass it down.
So technically what I'm saying is, you're saying I'm making the motion as I
Yeah, you
speak.
should.
I was looking for a little feedback from you first before I made the motion, is why I was having this discussion.
Okay, so you would repeat back what you're saying. I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to sound out here. What we are, would like to do for the first, let's say, 3 meetings, we would like to review the ULDCs as they come before us, and correct me back if I'm not saying your concept. We'd like to review the ULDCs, and then allow sufficient time for the public to review the videos, because they will be put up immediately, give their feedback to the town council, and then at the next meeting, make our final decision. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that they should, I don't know if they'll review the video, is this going to be in print as well?
Our
This meeting,
minutes.
our minutes.
Well, minutes, yeah.
So I guess for the public to review,
But the
What we have-
minutes are going to be action minutes. You got to be careful.
Right,
We're not
that's-
trying to create a verbatim.
I'm trying to
transcript of what
I
understand.
understand.
That's why we do video.
how about the public has an opportunity to review our decisions?
The public can
You
do
just
that at
changed-
any time. I want you all to be careful because you're getting hung up on the public. You are here to do a job. Whatever you recommend to the council still has to go to the planning and zoning board, which is another board. So you want to get public input, but you're the ones doing the job, okay? So, I mean, you know, you can take all the public input you want, but I don't get hung up on that, or you'll get paralyzed real quickly.
Well, what I was saying is, we make a decision, we have public input. We recognize that public input at the next meeting for the decisions we did on the previous meeting. We decide yes or no, and we go on.
I don't recommend that. You're talking about double jeopardy, twice going over the same decision.
That was just coming up.
And I don't think that's good. You'll have a hard time.
I was just thinking out loud, so I don't know.
This is not the point you want to bring up. John, okay, John.
I think if the videos, how long does it take to post them on?
It depends on how long the meeting goes. If it's a 2-hour meeting, it's not that bad. If you get done.
I was gonna say, maybe if we find a way through the website and maybe other communication to people, give them instructions on how to get to the video, and suggest that since there may be issues that touch them, that they need to go to the YouTube as soon as possible. Because I agree with you, the minutes ought to be focused on decisions made rather than any kind of background discussions and verbatim transcripts. And if someone has an issue that's burning interest, they ought to go to the video and see how it's been presented and discussed.
So
That's the best way. to
So
do it.
Mark, what you're saying, what you're suggesting then perhaps is that, what I'm hearing you suggest is that we go through the ULDCs, we make a decision, it's recorded, you know, it's available to the public on YouTube. If they can come and make a comment, here or turn it in, we'll listen to it here, but then they're to approach the P and Z and make their comments, is that?
No, what I was saying is, you are an advisory committee to council on ULDCs.
Right.
But any amendments that are gonna go through the process go through the P and Z as the LPA and the advisory group before it ever gets to council in
Right.
ordinance form for any changes or amendments to the ULDC.
So that's what I'm trying to understand the process here. So we are advisory to the P and Z, basically.
No,
Because
you're
what
advisory,
happens-
you're advisory to council.
Council, but
But the
what
way the
happens-
process works, the P and Z is still in the process.
Right, absolutely.
You do the
So-
amendments.
So what I'm just trying to relay here is what happens here, okay, after we review this, it is then going to the P and Z before it goes to council? Or does it go to council before, and then to P and Z?
No, what we'll do is, I'm planning on giving the council verbal reports of what's happening, probably, like I said, on a quarterly basis, and we'll see if we need more depending upon how much material you cover and how many actions you take. And then, that's more or less for council to hear what your recommendations are. If council's fine with those, then it would probably be sent to the P and Z, and the amendments would be processed to change the code.
But my question still is that, can the public then give their input at the P and Z?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not finalized?
Yeah, I mean, anything can change up through the process. Making, advisory recommendations, council can always change based upon the advice that you give them. It goes to P and Z. P and Z may hear the public, they may come up with a different, it'll be a long process.
So if we make a decision, and a week later, we're like, ooh, I didn't think about that, it's pretty much done.
No, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is I don't want you to get into a posture where you're starting to second guess yourselves on everything you do.
No, I understand, but if you totally miss something, if you totally miss, again, the tree fell across the road and you never thought about that, and we never addressed that, is there a way for us to come back as council members or committee members and go, you know what, guys, I'm sorry, that last thing we voted on, did you guys think about this, that, and the other? And if they all say, yes, we did, it's over. I mean, it should be a fairly simple thing to, I know where you're coming from, because if not, you'll never get anywhere. You'll never go down the road.
One thing I would say to you all is don't feel compelled that you have to make quick decisions. And I hope because I'm talking about timing and everything, I hope you're not getting hung up on that. I mean, we could talk tonight, you cannot make a single decision. This can all be brought back to the next meeting. And, when you're ready, you can make a decision. If not, you can defer it to your next meeting. You'll have enough time and ample time to do that.
Okay, we have a comment from the public.
I'm sorry, I put up the hand again. Part of the original problem with the ULDCs was that I think a lot of issues for different businesses, different lifestyles weren't considered. And to assume that 5 councilmen can do it, to assume that 5 people voted or elected to this committee can do it, I think is short-sighted. I believe that you will need really strong input from the public to make proper decisions. You will also need to have somebody say, wait a minute, as you're debating this and as you're trying to find solutions, you might think of something that's going to be worse than what we already have.
Which was Beck's point.
Exactly. At which point, if you don't allow the public to come in and say, maybe you want to have both, front and end. I mean, Palm Beach County doesn't have time. But you definitely, as you're deliberating, and does it need to be on subject? Absolutely. If a person does speak out of subject, you can always stop them. But you need to hear the issues in order to be able to address them properly and not create a can of worms that's going to be worse than what we have.
How about let me sound this out before I make the motion. How about, since we're a new committee, we take it one meeting at a time right now. And let's just start, because looking at this, my concern was, wow, do we have to make a decision on this? We're just being presented. Let's take we'll start with the meeting tonight, go through it, and not feel compelled to make a decision tonight for the first meeting. That will give the public time for input. And then when we come back to the second meeting, let's just see how this progresses.
Right.
So I would make a motion that we simply start the meetings, not feel forced to make a decision this evening, and see how we acclimate to the process. I don't know how to put that in the proper format.
Let me say this too, I think there has to be some trust in the staff from the standpoint that obviously, let's say, as an example, tonight we discuss both these topics, but we don't get anywhere because you're still getting acclimated and familiar and there's things you want to think about. Well, at the next meeting scheduled in February, we're going to use our judgment as to how much we can add on. We're not going to start to pile on so that you start looking at your agendas and there's 12 items there and I mean, we're going to try to pace it based upon, how fast you're going, what the issues are. Some issues are monumental, I mean, big, that, it might take a couple meetings before, you're able to get your arms around and say, okay, here's what we want to recommend to town council.
Oh, I know Howard had a point he's holding on to. I just don't know what the topic is, and we're not there yet.
No, we'll finish the little part.
Okay,
and then
Mr. Ryan.
In terms of organizing the public input, because, I don't think it does a lot of us, I don't think it helps us as a committee if the public contacts one member, but the other members aren't aware of that contact. Is there a way to have this funneled without creating an unrealistic burden for the town staff, to have public comments go through the town staff, and then maybe as part of the agenda for the next meeting, you give us a digest of the public comments on those topics, and that becomes one of the agenda items, to review the public input on that item.
We can do that.
Because otherwise, I'm afraid it gets too disjointed, and I know, having gone through the meetings where we were trying to develop this code, it was very unwieldy, because people would stray off topic, and trying to bring everything to a useful input or conclusion was hard. So that maybe if people look at the YouTube, understand the topic that we've been discussing, and they have comments, that if they gave those to the town and you summarize those and it became a review agenda item for the next meeting, that may be a way to be fair to everybody.
And I would say if that's, one of the ways you want to operate, sure, you can tell the public, we'll be happy to take all the comments, we'll compile them, and we'll bring them back at the next meeting. We might have a section where we go over, we may present all the comments to you, then that way, that'll work well, actually, for sure.
We could try to, Katie had a comment?
Wouldn't a way around some of this be on 170-40040, where it has upon denial of an application, there's a 2-year waiting period? Couldn't we put something else in there where if the public had a strong feeling, say the majority of the public wanted it to change whatever decision we made, that we could add something else in there that within 45 days something has to be submitted?
I think that's part of the ULDC. We're not at that point yet to get into that topic. That's the actual
That might help
ULDC.
us from going meeting to meeting if we add something rather than, that could drag on for 3 meetings. If people keep complaining about the same topic, we make a decision and.
Well, and I think all of you, by the first meeting, you're not going to have it down as to how you want to operate. I think it'll take a couple meetings before you start to see it, let's do this, let's do that, and you'll kind of change on the fly. I don't think you have to be so hard and fast that we have everything down in terms of the way we're going to operate.
Okay, I got 3 short things I want to go through. One is, Mark, when you use the word council, are we always to assume you mean town council rather than the town attorney?
Town council, yes.
Okay, because I still have problems with that in my head.
Yeah,
so-
I'll try to counsel, when I say attorney, it'll be.
Okay. The second thing is that I would suggest that we have a copy of the Palm Beach County ULDC that was in effect before our ULDC took over, in order to be able to refer to it, because the evolution of our ULDC was supposedly going to make things easier, not be tougher, and so on and so forth. And I believe in some of these items we've gone so far afield, and to be honest, I don't know what the planning guys rewrote and how they rewrote it, and I think we might want to go back and check how did we get there from here, and let's see what it said. So I think that's
I
necessary to
agree that
have.
has utility. I'd ask Jim for your opinion on that. Is that going to be hard to find that code frozen in time, because that goes back a number of years, and I'm sure the county has amended it.
We do have it. It's on the county's website under If you go to planning, zoning, building department, and then up under search, type in Loxahatchee roads, and you'll go to a webpage that has all of the codes and land use maps and zoning maps that were in effect as of 2006.
Right, but it would be appropriate for the town clerk to email that to us rather than us search for it, assume we're all finding the same document,
Yeah,
information.
The Uldc is,
Or else you can give us the web link, something. Here's
it's
the
like
web-
this. A paper copy of the Uldc is like this big.
Right.
Well, I was thinking more along the line,
Summary.
if we're discussing, okay, section such and such, okay, and if we so choose, we can say, hey, Jim, could you go to your laptop, would you look up what that section said in the 2006 Palm Beach County ULDC, and then we have it, and then we can go from there. That's what I'm referring to. Okay.
That makes it something that's feasible for us, and
That's what I was-
something that we can give you.
Right, but I would like to see the verbatim document, not someone's opinion of what it said. I'd like to see the actual
Yes, of
original
course.
section.
And the third item that I wanted to bring up, which was kind of already touched on, to begin, are we going to take these items as a whole, 170 or 75, or are we going to be able to initially start out by bringing up what I call tidbits? In other words, you were referring to, well, why do you got to wait 2 years? Okay, these things, when we read through them, I mean, the document as a whole appears to be very good and sound, but there's all these little tidbits in there that don't make sense. Does it make more sense to proceed in that fashion, where first we pull out these tidbits?
I think you can do the tidbits, especially because sometimes some of the code sections on the surface, it's not very clear, but it does affect other sections later on. So the tidbit might be very apropos at that point.
Okay, let's go back to the format of the meeting. Let's finish that discussion if we may, before we get to. So for now, again, before I make the motion, we're going to take the approach that we will go through this tonight. It'll be out there on YouTube. We'll look for public comments to come back to us in digest form for the next meeting. And then we can evaluate how we felt, how the process went. Okay?
Being that you are a very deliberative body, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, from a format standpoint, let me suggest one thing to see if you like this, and this is a way that you could probably work this. For those items that the staff are bringing, especially when they're first-time items, if you hadn't heard the presentation already, my recommendation would be for us to go through it and tell you, how we see it, why this was the way it was, or why it's not working, and give you that presentation. I would then say, if you want, especially to get some public input up front on those items, have the public speak. And then after that, you close off the public comment, because you are the deliberative body. If you mix the public deliberative with your deliberations, I think that's a recipe for war.
No. We just want to make
Process that
sure.
won't work.
Right, and I think everyone's concern is just the public has the opportunity to
Right.
speak to the issue. They know what they want to say. They're intelligent enough to read these documents.
And the reason I'm saying do it afterwards, because they would have the benefit of hearing
Absolutely.
what the staff is saying, so that and then they can get up and they can give you all the input
Right.
that they want. You can hear it, then and you can take that into account as you're deliberating on that.
And we can hear your topic, we'll hear the public input.
And so you could have it right up front after that. We just had it tonight at the back end because.
And in addition, though, we will still ask for the public summary digest for the first meeting. Okay? So I make a motion, we proceed with the format that as we go through this, staff will present the ULDC to us. We will accept public comments after the staff. We will also look to public comments from the digest that is presented to us, and then we will have our discussion.
Second that.
Now, can we go to see
You
to?
have to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Aye.
All in favor?
All in
Aye.
favor? Thank you.
That's okay. That's okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
All right, would you like us to head into the ULDC article we provided tonight?
Um,
Or do you want to take some public comment? Or-
Well, actually, we might, because of an issue that occurred, and I do have to bring this up, whether it's relevant or not, you can direct me if this is relevant or not. We had the Florida Attorney General advisory legal opinion issued on agriculture, and I just need to know if this is something that should be put up front in the ULDCs, what it's, how this affects the ULDCs. You know, if this is an ag issue where all ag is now exempt, and it's the very beginning of the ULDC, where does this fit into the ULDC?
Okay. Well, in terms of how it fits, I mean, we're going to be jumping around, because you may remember council kind of decided, rather than going on a page-by-page basis or things like that, they wanted you to hit certain, they wanted to place emphasis on certain topics. So it was my intention, we weren't going to get into the Attorney General opinion tonight. I want a little time to talk to Attorney Cirillo, go over it and that kind of thing. But it was going to be brought up in the next, if not the next meeting, maybe the one right after that. And that one's going to be a big topic by itself. So we can cover that whole issue, how it impacts the future, how it impacts the current ULDCs and that kind of thing.
Which, my point being that since we don't know the impact of this letter yet, since you haven't had time to speak to council, we really can't make a decision tonight on the ULDCs that involve agriculture.
Yeah, I would refrain from that tonight.
Okay,
I wouldn't get into it
that's
tonight.
fine.
Maybe by your next meeting, we'll be ready to do that.
Okay. I just wanted everyone to be aware that this will have an impact on the agricultural issue we're looking at this evening. Okay.
Well, let's at least start off on the special exception uses. And Jim has a PowerPoint, and he has in your packet, you have a whole bunch of information relative to special exceptions. I'm just going to start off by giving you some general comments on special exceptions as it relates from a land use standpoint. Special exceptions are considered quasi-judicial actions in Florida, which basically means that you're looking at them based upon the evidence. They're generally a permitted use per the code, but you have to go through a public hearing process with the town council and the planning and zoning board. They're a little bit different than what you see sometimes the use called conditional uses, and some people kind of use the terms interchangeably, but they are different. A conditional use is another form of permitted use, but generally what that is, there'll be some conditions identified in the code, and an applicant can come in as long as they meet those conditions, they're entitled to get the conditional use approved. Special exception obviously goes through the public hearing process. So in some cases you can have conditions tied to a special exception as well, depending upon the nature of it. Generally, the special exceptions are varied. There's a number of special exceptions that per code, per jurisdiction, that they consider to be something that falls into the special exception category. It used to be the uses that were at one point in time questionable, or maybe they were controversial by virtue of size, number, etc. In fact, that was the way the old state definition used to define a special exception. But with the Snyder decision back in the 80s and the 90s, as it relates, and where there was a fine distinction made between legislative action and quasi-judicial action, basically, as long as somebody can come in and show that the special exception that they're applying for meets the code, then generally, you have to actually have good reasons to overturn why the special exception should not be approved. Our code has some real interesting aspects to it, and Jim, I guess it was last year or 2011, he did the analysis. Did an analysis for town council. Most of the analysis is still very in vogue today. And so with that, I wanted Jim to go over, but I just wanted to give you some background on how special exceptions are treated as opposed to permitted uses and other types of uses you see. So with that, Jim, do you want to take it away?
Okay. Yeah, as Mark said, this particular code topic is a little bit more advanced into the process than most of the topics that we'll be discussing. I think it was June of 2011. A couple residents went to the town and complained about how difficult, time-consuming, and expensive the special exception process was. And I think it all evolved from a complaint by a resident that wanted to put a mobile home on his property. And he had to go through this entire long, lengthy, expensive process just to get a mobile home placed on his property. And the council directed staff at that time to take a look at the special exception process with the objective of analyzing the various requirements and trying to streamline the process in terms of reducing the requirements and reducing the costs that would have to be incurred by a property owner, particularly for certain special exceptions to gain approval. This slide shows a list of the various uses by town zoning district that require special exception approval. The town's zoning districts are in the column on the left, agricultural, residential, commercial low, commercial office, and institution public facilities. And the middle column identifies the uses in those various zoning districts that require special exception approval. One of the and the column on the far right just indicates whether or not the use in the zoning district is a principal use or an accessory use. And it also identifies whether or not, in addition to a special exception, it has to comply with conditional use criteria in the code as well. So it's possible, for example, looking at the use of outdoor events under the commercial low zoning district, in order to have an outdoor event approved in that district, you would have to get a special exception approval, which also requires site plan approval, and also comply with a long list of conditions in Chapter 80 of the code. And the town felt that was very likely very burdensome and not necessary, at least for certain of the special condition uses.
I hate to interrupt, but what is principal? You can do it without any, just because, or what does that mean?
Principal is
or can you define the things on the right-hand side?
Principal is like the primary use of the property. Uldc Farm, for example, is an accessory use to a principal use on that property. So a use can either be a principal use or an accessory use.
Don't we have issues concerning what principal uses? Can there be more than one principal use? If
Yes.
someone who lives on a 5-acre farm, is the principal use of that a residential dwelling, or is the principal use a farm, or does it in fact have two principal uses?
You can have two principal uses.
In fact, a good example of that is a shopping center. You know, the principal use is a shopping center, but yet you have a series of uses within a shopping center that could all be construed to be principal uses.
Okay,
Well,
John?
yeah, I think, with regard to that, that's pretty well dealt with under the county, that the residence is one use, and the agricultural use is a separate use, and they have two different classifications, two different calculations.
Yeah, it is possible under the town's code to have more than one principal use on the property. Okay, now, in terms of the first thing that we looked at was the application requirements for special exception approval. Under the town's code, any project that is coming in and requesting any kind of approval has to fill out what's called the general application. And that is, the general application includes the minimum set example of the general application,
Page 11.
in attachment A, so this report. And you can see that, that's on page,
Well, page 11 shows the site plan application requirements. Do you have another page?
it's on page 16 of 40.
Page 16?
16 of 40.
This starts the application.
Right.
That's got the number 8,
That,
primary page number.
that's the town's general application, and you can see that most of the information on a general application is relatively simple to provide. In addition to that, an applicant is required to complete a special exception application, which is included in attachment B of the report. That also is relatively simple, basic information. And the third application is a site plan application, and that's where the process can get very expensive and time consuming. If the site plan application is included in attachment C, and if you take a quick look at what's involved, not necessarily with the application itself.
Page 11?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You can see that,
The survey has to be less than 2 years old.
yep, yeah. And if you turn to page 13,
14 or 13?
13. In addition to the filling out the application itself, there are several other documents that have to be submitted with the site plan. That's where it can get very expensive.
And this is for anyone, you're not just talking Southern Boulevard or Okeechobee, you're talking every property in this town.
Any one of those uses that were on that first table that I showed you.
Excuse my ignorance, but can we, this is like a lot of bureaucratic stuff. Can you give us an example of what, if you have an ag residential, what would involve something like this?
What would it want?
What, if you have an ag residential area, 5 acres, and you have a home on there, what would be a special use thing? If somebody wants to do what, would you have to do something like this?
Okay, well, now that's what that table was that I showed you with all those uses on it. Anytime you have one of those uses,
Page
So
10.
if you have ag residential and you wanted to do a retail nursery, that's allowed because it's principally used.
As of this
That's
ULDC,
okay.
and that's,
Okay, go to page 10 of 40 in your agenda packet.
Okay, that's page 2, if you're looking at the primary page.
Okay?
Okay, page 10 of 40 in the agenda package. That's a table that shows zoning district by zoning district, all of the uses that currently require special exception approval.
and I'd like to emphasize that Jim said currently, and that's what we're here to review
Yes.
as part of the process.
So if you have a 5 acre parcel that has an AR zoning district on it, and you want to do any of those uses in the middle column, you have to get a special exception approval. And part of the reason that residents came to the council was the fact that looking at a use like a mobile home, should we have to go through that entire process of all those applications, complete all those studies and documents just to put a mobile home on my property? The same thing, the same issue came up with the outdoor events. We had a couple of churches over the holidays that wanted to put on holiday events, and that under the current code, they're subject to obtaining a special exception approval, which is a very burdensome process.
Such as the Christmas pageant that we
Yes,
discussed at town
so-
council.
So the objective of this particular task that we're looking at tonight is to try to streamline that process and maybe identify a couple of these uses that don't need to be treated in as strict a manner as some of the other uses.
Well, the one thing that you started to touch on, I should bring your attention to the fact that requiring a full-blown site plan in conjunction with a special exception application is a very onerous requirement. In fact, it's the first time I've ever seen it in my entire career. Usually what communities will do with a special exception is they'll have a conceptual plan requirement or something, but not to the detail of a site plan. That's an entire process all by itself, and you're actually almost ready to build your project, whatever it is. And that's why it becomes so onerous for somebody. They don't even know if they've gotten a special exception approval, and they have to go through all this time and effort to do a full-blown site plan.
So, excuse me just one moment to make sure I understand. So staff is suggesting that perhaps the site plan may not be necessary.
Absolutely, especially in the issue of like the event,
Christmas pageant.
yeah, pageants and the special events that are just, you know.
Mr. Ryan?
I see some pretty rapidly developing land clearing and land uses, specifically on Collecting Canal. There's like a temporary stable and dressage training ring. On South A Road, there's a multiple horse training operation with a lot of paddocks and barns and mobile homes on the site, I presume for the caretakers or the groomsmen or whatever. Have those gone through this whole process, or are they just popping up and waiting for somebody to say, hey, you got to do this, and they haven't done it?
The special exception process has been on hold for, how long? What was the first time council asked you to?
A year ago last summer.
Okay.
The staff report that you have actually has two reports in it. The first report is the one that starts on page 9 to 40. That report has already gone to council. That went to council a year and a half ago. And they gave us direction based on that report to proceed with coming up with some specific recommendations for code amendments. The second report that is in the agenda package, and that starts on page.
Excuse me? I have a question. Is it appropriate at this time, or can I go ahead and take it just if it's brief?
If it's a question.
If it's, yes.
It's a question. The property on Collecting Canal, for what I heard, the description of it is an equestrian activity. So I would assume, or I would think that if they don't have it, they will apply for the agricultural classification. Therefore, they should be exempt from.
As long as it's a 5-acre parcel.
Really?
Yes.
Where does it say that?
Palm Beach County zone, it has to be 5 acres
To have the agricultural classification?
to get an agricultural exemption.
No,
There's no exemption.
They changed it.
they thought they changed it. There's things in there that are illegal that the tax appraiser's office does not go by.
I'd like to point out, though, Mr. Ryan did bring up a second example that we'll discuss later, and he also brought up a second equestrian property that also had mobile homes, and right now, because special exemption is on hold, that has not been evaluated, is what.
My question is, why would they need a special exemption for
For the
what?
mobile home, well, that's what they're discussing now, is if everything's on hold, and what should and should not. That's what our purpose is here, to discuss what should or should not be.
Yeah, because we still got commercial equestrian operations as requiring a special exception.
Right, and that seems a bit, that's what we're here to say is, and as they said, site plan, Mark himself, staff said site plan may be unnecessary, and that's what we're doing. We're just trying to go through what is currently on the books and what is to be eliminated.
Well, that's
or
why I'm
stay.
asking the question. I'm just pointing out things that may be.
Exactly. That's
You
what
got it.
Jim's doing also. Howard?
I'm having a hard time with quite a few things, but page 23 of 40. The paragraph that talks about a mobile home. Based upon the above, key characteristics of a mobile home include. Now, when I read this paragraph, basically it tells me that all you have to do is eliminate your heater and you don't have a mobile home. I mean, that's what it says. It says a mobile home contains all these things, heat, air conditioning, and whatnot. Only a structure meeting these characteristics would need a special exception approval. Okay, any structure without all these characteristics would not be classified as a mobile home under the ULDC. So all you gotta do is rip out your heater and you don't have a mobile home.
Yeah, your electric, you'd have to, you wouldn't have electric.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I mean, well, just the heater.
Just the heater.
Just the heater. According to the way this is written, all you gotta do is disconnect the
I
heater.
think part of that paragraph, though, is they're trying to make a distinction, because I think the key words there are, is designed to be used as a dwelling unit. Because we have some people that put up mobile homes to be used as like, watching a site.
Yeah, but it takes care of that in a separate paragraph, okay?
I just wanna, if we could let Jim continue from his point, we can kind of jump it
Well,
ahead.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's another topic that maybe we can address. I mean,
Right.
That's outside of the scope of what we're talking about tonight, but that's a definition that we may have to work on.
Right, if you could continue
Yeah.
from, where were you, on what page, please?
Yeah, I was mentioning the fact that we had done two reports. The first report went to the council, made the presentation, and they directed staff to come back with the recommendations to make revisions to the special exception. That the report that we generated to identify those recommendations is the second report in this staff report, which starts on page 22 of 40. That's where the staff recommendations for change to the special exception process actually start.
But the first report was the one you gave to the town council.
Yes.
And you said to come back with some recommendations,
Yes.
and that's what's on 22.
So you're saying this page 22 and 40 are your recommendations now?
The actual recommendations are presented in terms of recommended amendments to the ULDC. And those start on page 28 of 40.
Okay, that's what, I just want to make sure we know where your recommendations, your recommendations to changing the existing ULDC start on page 28 of 40.
28 of 40.
This is what staff is recommending.
Yeah, and anything that is underlined there is an addition to the current code language. Anything that is struck through is a recommended deletion of current code language. And what we basically what we did was to take all of the special exception uses that were presented in that previous table and categorize them into potential high impact special exceptions, potential low impact special exceptions, and then a third category which we call temporary events, which would be the outdoor events.
I'm sorry, say that again. The underlined is what you were proposing?
Underlined is proposed additions to the current code. And the strike-throughs are proposed deletions.
So what you're saying is, it sounds a little bit confusing, because on category C for a temporary event, and you're saying, which could be an overnight, like some of the agriculture, we have Swank Farm that may set up for the day, or somebody may set up for a weekend event.
Right.
You're saying they can have no overnight buildings, tents, or similar structures overnight?
No, what I'm saying is that if they can certify to those 6 items, they don't have to get a permit at all.
Okay, so that was
So, that's right. Anything that can certify in writing can stipulate to the fact that they're not going to be providing any of those items, they don't need a permit.
So when you say shall not be required, item C, shall not be required to obtain a category C special exception, that's code for permit?
Yes.
I just want to know what the code for permit here is. Okay, so on page 28 of 40, applicability, so then that means no permit needed if they meet all 6 requirements.
That's right. If an outdoor event comes into the town and cannot stipulate to all of those items, they have to get a permit.
Okay, now let me ask you this, what does it mean then if they cannot stipulate to those 6 items? Where's their worksheet for what they have to do?
Okay, then they would be a category C, special exception. And if you go through,
I'm sorry, hold on, category, okay. Like, down a little bit, section 170, 015?
right,
Okay.
okay,
So that is, okay, and you have not struck that out. A site plan meeting, the requirements of Article 155, that lengthy site plan?
okay, now there's a provision in the site plan approval requirements that gives the town manager the ability to waive certain site plan application requirements if, in his opinion, he feels that they aren't necessary for that particular use. Okay? And-
Where is that in?
well, that's in the site plan.
Okay.
That's in the site plan.
We'll have to do that.
See, that's what, I guess we're getting a first-hand example of how complex these changes can be. Because if we make changes to one section of the code, it very often has impacts in other sections, which we have to, and the changes end up being a lot greater than we think.
But doesn't it also place a burden on the town manager? And also, on my concern, and Mark, you can speak to this, the objectiveness, you know, it can put, we've talked about some things at the finance committee, you know, about objectivity. When, you know, it's the way you're saying it, it's, the town manager will be the one that can weigh, approve or deny. And that may, you do have it streamlined a bit on how he makes his decisions. You have a checklist on that?
Well, that's, the town manager is also a professional planner.
Right.
We have a planning staff. We have consulting engineers, and we also have a development review committee of other professionals. So he's not making these decisions in a vacuum. It's sort of like a team look at it. Professionals in the field make recommendations to Mark, and then he would be the one that actually makes the decision to grant or deny waiver. And part of the process that we're setting up here is that when an applicant is anticipating applying for a special exception, we're saying, okay, you come in for a pre-application meeting. And prior to that meeting, or as part of that meeting, you need to bring in a written description of what you want to do. And we're going to sit down and go through the requirements, and then we'll talk about granting waivers, either immediately at that meeting or after the meeting, when the manager has had a chance to review the request with his professionals. So that potentially relieves an applicant of very costly application requirements that in many instances are not necessary or pertinent to his application. And I personally feel that goes a long way towards streamlining the process. But that only happens, well, the manager can waive site plan requirements on any site plan application. Okay, and we've already done that.
Just a suggestion. Obviously, you know, I read the first part and then the second part, and understand that the second part is addressing recommendations to expedite the first part and to make improvements in the process. The recent discussion, to me, is jumping around the recommendation section without really putting things in the context of the written recommendations. And
All right,
just
where would
as
you
I
like to
thought,
have that?
I'd almost like to start on page 22 and just say, has anybody made notes on page 22 that they would like to comment on? And then go to page 23, has anybody made notes that they would like to comment on?
Okay, and again, my beginning comment, which Mark and I had the discussion in the beginning, anything related to agriculture, we have to wait for his discussion with the town attorney, correct?
Well, I probably won't have the town attorney here, that's one reason why I suggested it. If I can, let me make a comment on that though too, because this is the reason why I thought this was an excellent topic to bring to you for the first meeting. Because it's not uncommon to see when you look at zoning ordinances and town ordinances in many cities, they will have that waiver kind of language. They'll say either the city manager, the town manager, or his designee. Personally, I've never liked the ability to waive things. I just take it a little more seriously that, you know, it can get you in trouble sometimes.
Yes.
Even though your best intentions may be being considered. But I don't think you guys should feel that you're under the gun and that you have to necessarily come up with the exact answer from the standpoint of the regulations. And let me give you an example. In this, you know, I think Jim has put together a very good recommendation in terms of the category C for temporary events. But you might look at this and say, we don't like it. Well, staff, tell council our recommendation is that you remove temporary events from this category and special exceptions and just make it its own review process. Doesn't mean you have to have all the answers as to what the language is going to be. But you've already laid the roadmap for us to take back and tell council, and then that'll be up to staff or whoever council wants to address and have them go ahead and put that language together. But you come up with the solution as to how you want to see it handled. So that's just an example. This one is good because it gives you a lot of things to think about as it relates to special exceptions and also to temporary events kind of being lumped together.
All right, so starting with, if Mr. Ryan, we want to go back to page 22, let's start. Jim, are you, first we need to ask Jim, as his presentation, what he needs to finish.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably a good suggestion. I mean, that'll allow us to go through the staff report.
Let's go back to page 22.
Rather than jumping back and forth. Well, that'll keep us on track a little bit.
Yeah, I think just in terms of taking the recommendations, which are changes to the background information that we presented in the first part of the agenda pack, I understood what page 22 was, and I didn't have any comments on page 22, but I just thought that an orderly process would be to start on that and see if anybody had made notes in the margin that they wanted to discuss. My notes picked up on page 23.
Okay.
I got a comment. I wasn't there, but I was given information about a disagreement between the town attorney and a member of the public of the misunderstood term permitted use. And when it says permitted use, that means you got to get a permit for it. And under the Palm Beach County ULDC, permitted use was the same as allowable use. And I was shocked to find out the town attorney didn't understand this, or at least at that moment he didn't. And I would suggest, is it at all possible to change the word permitted to allowed in order to eliminate any misunderstanding between a use that you need a permit for as opposed to a permitted use?
Permitted use is normally the terminology that most codes use. They don't use allowable. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean,
Well, then
Can you talk to the attorney?
I mean, when an attorney argues with you over that, where the heck are you?
Well,
You know, I mean.
then your suggestion is that we ask the attorney to acknowledge that permitted use means allowable and does not require a permit.
I'm surprised it's an issue.
Apparently.
Well, I mean, when you say it's not required to get a permit, I mean, they still have to get a building permit.
No,
I mean,
that's not what he said.
Yeah. but that-
Growing corn is a
But
permitted
that's-
use, you don't have to get a building permit for
Well, you have to
growing
get,
corn.
yeah, you have to get a building permit if a building or a structure is involved.
Right,
Yeah, you don't have to get a building permit to plant.
you don't have to get a permit to do the activity.
Okay, can you translate what it says, commercial low, outdoor events, permitted use subject to section 80-025 of the ULDC? Translate that word for us, please.
Okay, you can do that use as long as you comply with the conditions in section 80-25.
Okay, and that's all that Howard is saying. If you are already commercial low and you are part of section 80-025, you're allowed to do this. According to Howard, our lawyer says that permitted means you have to have a permit. Instead of, yes, you're allowed to do it without having a permit. How do we translate that into really silly terms so that we can all be on the same page?
I'd have to talk to the attorney to find out.
That's what we're
exactly
asking,
all
as we
what
ask for
said.
clarification, if you
I don't
really.
remember that discussion, but.
I mean, permitted is a very generic word. You see permitted in the code, it means, for example, that when you have a table of permitted uses, what it means is these are the uses that would be allowed in a certain district. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily there could be conditions attached to them, different code regulations, and other sections of the code that apply. But it's giving you just a generic, yes, this is a permitted use. It can be allowed in this district.
Mr. Rowe?
I need to know more specifics on your issue. That one sounded strange.
Let me simplify one thing, because even though it wasn't in the agenda pack, I pulled out section 80 of our code, which was conditional uses. And what this is saying back in, made more sense to me when I pulled out this section. If you go to Article 80 and you go to 80-025, those are prescribed conditional uses for an outdoor event. So what this is saying, you don't have to go before the town council and go through a whole bunch of special exception procedures. This is an allowable use as long as you comply with all of the conditions that are already stated in Article 80 in Section 025. And there are a couple of pages of things there that say if you want an outdoor event, you can get a permit, but you've got to comply with these things. It's kind of like a pre-approval of an outdoor event as long as you comply with these prescribed conditions.
Right, which would have
So,
been helpful if we had that in the agenda, as your point is well taken. That would have helped us by having that in the agenda, if there was an item referred to, as Howard, I believe, brought up earlier. Also, if something is in the Palm Beach County, ULDC, the original version, we'd like that. And if something is in, referred to, or refers to another section, we'd like that also, so that we may compare it.
I mean, I understand that there are certain things that have become customary, okay? Later on, I'm going to object to the word notwithstanding, okay? Why don't you just say despite,
Right.
okay? So anybody that can read the English language understands exactly what it means. And this business of permitted, okay, as opposed to allowed, despite the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that there's long-standing customs in ULDC documents to say a permitted use, in a document where you're saying this requires a permit, but this is a permitted use, there's always chance for misunderstanding, and I'm a firm believer that any intelligent human being should be able to read a document and understand it. You shouldn't have to go to an attorney. And so, you know, if, for example, what we're discussing, it says allowed use subject to blah, blah, blah. That doesn't change the meaning of it, but it allows anybody to understand it without misconstruing it. And that was my point.
And at this point, do we need to make that a motion, or just a topic of a point?
No, I don't think
We
it's
just-
a motion.
We're not making any changes right now,
No, I think this is a good deliberation, I think.
but it's a deliberation for what purpose?
I mean, at one point, would I make a motion that we change the word permitted to allowed?
I think it would run more smoothly if you make all your recommendations or all your motions relative to whatever action you're going to take at one time.
Okay.
And that way we can make sure we're not missing something that happened in the middle of a discussion somewhere.
Yeah, one more point that hopefully will alleviate a little confusion. Table 1, that's on page 10 of 40, that's the table that has the listed uses that require a special exception. In the far right-hand column, we have the terms principal use and permitted use. Those are really almost one and the same. Where there's where it says permitted use, that zoning district does not have any accessory uses in it. Okay. Where it says principal use, that zoning district allows accessory uses as well. So it makes a distinction between principal and accessory. If it says permitted, there are no accessory uses in that district. So principal and permitted are essentially the same, have the same meaning there.
So principal use can include accessory,
No.
permitted?
No. If the term principal use is used, that's in a zoning district that also allows accessory uses.
Right.
So accessory and principal uses are both in zoning districts that have principal uses. If it's in a district that has permitted, there's only permitted uses. There's no accessory uses.
Just for clarification, to me, you know, and I didn't maybe check it, it's organized a little differently with lines, horizontal lines, but table 1 under the special exception recommendations, which I hope is the one we're focused on, seemed to me to be really the same as the table on page 10 of 40.
It is.
Yes.
So it's identical, so let's not refer to 10 of 40.
Okay.
We're looking at what your recommendations are, and we're trying to go through those.
Okay, and I'd
Yeah,
like
that's
to
true. That's just a
comment.
recap of what was in the first report. So
Right.
they're two
It's
separate.
identical.
Okay, I'd like to, since we're starting on 22,
Okay.
and we'll go, the purpose of this report, this is to analyze the town's special exception approval process. Uses requiring special exception approval, so as Mr. Ryan was saying, you're keeping this table the same, you've made no changes on this table?
No, this is, I guess there's a little confusion because there's actually two reports here.
Right.
The first report, I prepared that and gave it to the council. The second report, I brought forward some items that were in the first report.
Okay.
And so this table is the same as it was in the first report, and is just a summary of uses that currently require a special exception.
Okay, it's just the beginning, it's not any
Yeah.
changes or requests.
Because these reports went to the council months apart, so I just wanted to.
All right, so as Mr. Ryan was saying, anybody wanted to comment, so I will start on page 22 of the comment. My question is, if this report uses the same table, if you could summarize, did you make any changes to this table then in your recommendations?
No.
No, okay.
No, this table is not in the ULDC. This is my personal summary,
Right.
and that's the same as it was before this.
Okay, so this is not in the ULDC, but when we look at it, it almost gives us a
Summary.
that we think it is. I'm just saying, when we visually look at this, we get the feeling, the impression that, oh, this is in the ULDC. When I see agricultural residential and these like retail nursery needing a special exemption, I'm thinking you're saying a retail nursery needs a special exemption. So,
It does.
okay, and again, my comment then on page 22, you're saying a retail nursery needs a special exemption, or even a U-Pig farm, or let's say a commercial equestrian operation. Again, I have to go back to, we need a discussion from Mr. Putney and Mr. Sorello on if these are exempt now.
Right, so we can't even touch that.
So we can't, is that correct? We can't, this isn't even on the table.
Those are all considered ag.
I don't really want to get into the
No, I'm just
opinion,
saying-
but it's
no,
that was geared more
just
toward
simply,
setbacks and structures, okay, so.
but you're looking, and what is confusing is you're asking for special exemptions, special exceptions for an ag business. That is what is confusing.
No, we're not asking for it, that's what's in the code now, that's what the code says.
Right, but-
We're not proposing it.
Right,
That's
but
what
then
it
when
is.
I asked you what your recommendation was.
Okay, I'm not, my recommendation is essentially, if you're looking at table 1 on page 22, all of those uses in the middle column, I'm saying that we don't need to review all of those uses in the same manner. I'm going to categorize them into high-impact uses, low-impact uses, and temporary events. And the new process, if we adopt it, is going to have separate, more streamlined review processes for each of those 3 categories. So, table 1 is the way it is now. Every one of these uses requires a special exception, which requires a general application, special exception.
No, I've
application, site
understood
plan,
you,
all that.
nothing's changed, I've still understood what
okay.
you're saying. That's my
Okay,
concern is,
okay.
I'm still understanding what you're saying, and ags, there's things that are ag that you're saying will still continue to require a special exception.
Well, until we have that meeting.
Yeah.
Right, that was my point, that's
Yeah.
why I'm saying
Yeah,
to
well, what I would suggest is that, I mean, we don't really know what the attorney's recommendation is going to be
Right.
as far as ag goes. So let's proceed through
Without
this. And then at some point in the future, when we know what that recommendation is, we can go back and revise everything we've done to be consistent with what the attorney recommends.
which is what Beck and Howard
Yeah.
kind of brought up in the beginning.
Sure.
Mark, there's a comment behind you, can I take that?
Nina, according, we'll do it properly now. Nina, according to E-Road. 2 issues. You pointed out, and you've seen this in front of the council before, that you have tried to, or attempted to, group things into high use and low use. One of the things that, for example, ended up still in a high use is the commercial equestrian. If you read the description of what commercial equestrian is, I hardly think that most of that qualifies as high use. It seems that most of the things that are on that list on page 22 under ag residential, most of them, when you look at the description of what qualifies them to be this high-use commercial, would not, none of you would think that it's a high-use commercial. It seems to be a direct attack at really res ag, at being able to live the lifestyle that we live in Loxahatchee Groves. If you want to apply that onto some cookie-cutter subdivision, it'd probably be perfect, but not for Loxahatchee Groves. When you're talking about ag exemptions, or ag classifications as the proper term is, if you're coming into a neighborhood, you're starting up something. In order to, it's a question of what's there first, the chicken or the egg. You need to have certain things in place in order to ask for that ag classification. And if you don't have anything there, you're not going to get it. You need to be that commercial entity. You need to be able to go and say, here's this, here's that, here's X, Y, Z, and then you can expand on it if you like. But you need certain things in order to get that ag classification. We are on a consistent downside number of agricultural places that are currently have the exemption in Loxahatchee Groves. And I think it is partially because of what we're imposing on the properties to go through. Most of these places that we have right now are all existing without going through the proper things they're supposed to do according to ULDCs. We're asking for people to do, basically act and do illegal things. And this is exactly why this ULDC needs to be reviewed properly and understood, not just recommended by Mr. Fleischman of well, you know, if there's a tent there, God forbid, my kids have a birthday party or something, or overnight. I mean, these are not fixing the problems of all of these, you know, the retail nurseries, the commercial equestrian, the rescues. You know, I'm sure we have a bunch of foster homes. Any of that.
Okay, let me respond to that. You know, I created these categories with the principal idea in mind of trying to reduce as many of the burdensome requirements as I possibly could. Now, if this board feels that a particular use is a low impact rather than high impact, that's fine. I'm not adamant about which uses have to remain as a high impact use or a low impact use. Because of the nature of the community, if we want to go with the system that I'm suggesting, and the board feels that a use that I'm calling high impact is low impact, fine.
I think some of the issues too, Jim, from hearing what people have said over the years and hearing the terms high impact and low impact. One, it would be helpful to have the definition of what you call high impact and low impact, because I could think of a commercial, you know, Southern Boulevard building being high impact, but I wouldn't think that an agricultural nursery. But I just want to make sure, you know, we understand how you're using the term. And again, I have to get back to the fact that, as we've discussed, the agricultural issue is off the table for now until we have an opinion. So we're not even discussing that. But if you could review what you call high and low impact, it would be helpful to us.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any real hard definition of high impact and low impact.
No, just how you see it.
But there are considerations. Traffic definitely is that. Noise, lights at night, incompatibility of a use with its neighbor.
So a motocross might be a high. I might consider a motocross.
Yeah. Yes,
High impact.
those are, and that's why we have the special exception process in the first place, is because there are uses that we're saying that on the face of it are generally consistent with the uses that we allow in this category. However, because of the potential of the way those businesses or those uses operate, or traffic they generate, or noise they generate, it could be impactful on the neighbors. So the special exception process gives the town and its boards an opportunity to look at those uses to make a determination as to whether or not those potential impacts need to be mitigated. Is there something we can do to lessen the impacts? That's all this process does. And
Yeah, just so it makes sense to me, what you're saying is the special exemption process takes what may be in everybody's mind of what should be a low impact, but it makes sure it's a low impact.
Yes.
As opposed to just a blanket exemption for something that we may think of as low impact, but if it's not operated correctly, it could be a high impact.
That's exactly right. It gives the town a chance to look at certain uses to ensure that it is not impactful upon its neighbors.
But I think we also, in this discussion, have to be mindful of Florida statutes and again, we're taking ag off the table for now, but we have to be mindful of how Florida statutes, and especially the Right to Farm Act, impact our ag. When we get to that point, you know, we have to protect that, because that may, like Altman's may be considered high impact, however, they're protected, they may be fully protected. So that, while some people might consider that high impact, my opinion would be they don't require a special exemption.
Sure. Well, if you look at page 26 of 40, that's table 2. That's where I take all of the uses that currently require special exception approval, and I am suggesting whether or not those uses should be put into a high impact or low-impact category. And then category C, of course, is the temporary use of the outdoor uses. Over in the right-hand column, that's my suggestion for what category they should be in. We certainly can take some uses out of category A and put them in category B, or vice versa. Take some B's and put them in A's, if that is the opinion of the committee. But again, this entire process that we're going through is solely oriented to make the approval process, cost, and time less burdensome on property owners as we can possibly make it. But still achieve the objective of the special exception process, where we're being respectful of the neighbors of these uses and giving us a chance to mitigate any potential impacts.
Madam Chair, one thing I would add too, I think what's been very illustrative tonight, and something that we should follow through on in the future, I would recommend to the board that one of the things you look at very carefully for anything that we're going to be reviewing in the future is the general definition section, because we've already had several discussions as to what a term means or what it may mean. And I think even from the staff standpoint, if we're proposing something, I think we need to be able to define it for you as to what we're proposing, just so you have an idea. And what I may do is in the next meeting, I may actually include the definition section, because I think that's an important section.
Isn't this in the back or no?
No,
Just
I think
kidding.
so.
Oh, no, okay. No. All right, that would be wonderful.
And that's enough.
Or even as a, definition, or as Jim had to go through tonight and explain his concept.
Right.
Helpful.
Yeah. Let me just read this. This is
What page?
this is on at the bottom of page 22, and it gives you a good sort of one small paragraph summary of what special exception is. Special exception uses, due to their unique characteristics and potential impacts upon neighboring uses or the town, require individual review of their location, design, configuration, and/or operation in order to ensure that they are appropriate at a particular location. And that's where we look at a use and its location, identify potential impacts, and try to mitigate those impacts on its neighbors.
And again, when you're looking at those special uses, again, when you go back, you keep, and again, there's the leeway, there's leeway, which Mr. Ryan pulled up the table that he had, the information he had in the section 80, which we did not have, so we'll have to look that up on our own, so we can all take time to review that.
Yeah, and let me just make a comment on that. The list of conditions that an outdoor event has to meet in the current code is probably 3 pages long. It's an entire litany of.
So then we can make the suggestion to make it much smaller and get staff's input.
Right, and that's why I had the recommendation in there that if a project, if an outdoor event can certify that it's not going to do any of those 6 items, then it doesn't need a permit at all.
Mr. Owens?
Yeah, I think Mark brought up the real problem area with the existing code in terms of the detailed site plan requirements as opposed to a conceptual use plan. I think that would be an important change that would make these classifications much more workable, because the Form A and the Form B are fairly straightforward, and having a conceptual use plan would really reduce the burden on people that do have an obligation to present what they want to do as a special exception. I think your definition down at the bottom of page 22 is a good one. It's saying that the town really wants to make a review with respect to these criteria here. It's not saying it's blanket allowable or that it's going to be an onerous process. It's just going to be a process that requires a review. And I think changing the site plan to a conceptual use plan is good, because then it could be up to either the town staff or the town council if they were really worried about someone getting by with something on a conceptual use plan. They could make a special condition that they prepare a detailed site plan before final approval. So I think all of that can work, but I think Mark's comment earlier as to what he'd seen in other towns that are addressing these kind of issues of having a conceptual use plan, maybe that would be good to formalize as part of the recommendations here, which hasn't been done so far.
Mark, could you speak to the difference between the conceptual, the site plan is very intensive, as we all saw. It has quite a bit of detail. The conceptual use plan would have how much information?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily tied down with all the bearings and points and everything, and generally what it is, it's more like it could be more of a bubble plan, or give you an idea as to the concept of what the development is, so you don't have to have, if it's,
Can I
say,
hand draw
commercial.
and submit it to you?
No, well, no, it should be a scale. I mean,
Yeah, so I have to have an
concept plan would be a scale.
architect present something, you have to have the expense of an architect prepare it.
Not necessarily, but if it's drawn to scale, that's the most important thing. And it depends upon what the special exception is for. I mean, again, you can probably get away with something more simplistic if it's not a, but if, like, generally, I guess a good example of a concept plan versus a site plan, if you were talking like a shopping center, for example, a shopping center would have everything, it would be tied down to the most engineering point that you would need in order on the plans. The concept would show you maybe the rough location of the building, what parking areas would be, but it wouldn't be that tied down to the point that you would go in and go for a set of building plans as you would with a site plan. And Mr. Ryan's point was very good, because what you could do when you have a concept plan, a lot of times when governmental bodies would be dealing with a concept plan and they liked something and they didn't want to see a change, the typical condition was that development would occur in accordance with the conceptual site plan submitted, or concept plan submitted, or whatever they called it. And so therefore, if you all of a sudden were making a radical change from what you showed in this concept plan, you had a problem. You got to go back and get your approval. So.
Okay. So for tonight, we're on page 26 of 40, right at this point. And you're asking us to look at this and give input?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, that would be fine. But that's essentially what my first recommendation is to create categories of special exceptions, A, B, and C. And then that table 2 on page 26 is my recommendation as to which of the A, B, or C categories that all of the uses that currently require special exception approval should be placed in.
At one point, just to remember, Jim's recommendations are based upon the existing uses that are currently in the code. Now, if you think some things are special exceptions that shouldn't be, or some things should be added, that's a whole different topic that we have to get into and discuss. He's kind of just applying what's currently there in the code now. If you think there's some other serious change that needs to be considered, then we have to talk about that.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to actually go over the specific things that, like, well, I mean, we have to kick out all the ag stuff, but if you have an outdoor event and an AR deal, I mean, you pretty much are saying if you have a birthday party, you have to get a permit?
No, not under what I'm proposing.
But I mean, the way it is right now.
That's true.
That's ridiculous.
That's why we're here.
Is there a way, I mean, I think we've got it figured out that there's all these.
We're going to kick out the ag for now.
Can we go over some of these
Yes,
things and
that's what
discuss
he's trying to do.
each one individually?
Yes, that's what he's waiting to do. Now
Okay, before I want to make one more comment about ag, so you come back to the table with the full answer, okay? Because the AGO opinion has absolutely nothing to do with this table in relation to commercial equestrian facilities. Okay, so what you're going to have to get the attorney to do is find out if any of these things are considered by the Palm Beach County Tax Appraiser's Office bona fide agricultural use, and if they are, they cannot be on this table by state statute. So you have two questions to ask. One is the AGO opinion, and the other is, are any of these bona fide ag according to Palm Beach County tax appraisal?
That's not entirely true, but that may be part of the discussion we need to have.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's part of the discussion, because I don't think because you're bona fide ag means you can't have a special exception.
No.
You get, I mean, there are so many rules with ag, you gotta be careful not to make sweeping generalizations.
All right, let's have that discussion, and let's start the discussion. Mark, you're saying that bona fide ag,
No, let's not do that.
Oh, I thought you
Tabling
said-
that.
I
No, we're tabling that.
okay, you are tabling it.
Yeah, I said, that's part of what we have to discuss.
I think what I'm finding out tonight is probably we're gonna do, we are gonna do the AGO and have Mike here the next week for that, because I think we need to get that off center.
Yes.
We're that large. This whole deal is ag. I mean, we have, Los Angeles Groves has so much ag, it needs to be on the table, but, and I'm barely aware of this till you brought it up.
It is on the table.
But, I mean, we can't continue on a lot of things because of that. So, I mean,
We
I think
can
that definitely needs to be addressed.
And what we're saying, what Mr. Ryan is saying,
That's-
let's table it, it's what I
Yeah,
was
That's
saying
the
from the
item for the
beginning.
next
Let's-
meeting.
Yes, have them have a discussion, but let's look at some of these other things, discuss it. And so Jim, if you could just begin with anything that's not agriculture.
Okay, well, starting at the top, I'll just run down the list. Nonprofit community recreational facility, I have in category A.
Can you elaborate on what that is? An example? I mean, because that's,
Yeah, I would say that probably would be like the Portuguese American Club.
Or could it be the Good Earth Farm?
well, sir, would that not be in the institutional and public facilities where it says private service clubs or lodge?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the first one again. What is a nonprofit community recreational facility?
Vince Ramos?
Because I'm still gonna use Good Earth Farm too.
Vince Ramos could be.
The farm might be more rescue and an ag issue.
She's nonprofit, she's nonprofit, she's open operational to the public.
I don't think she would be a recreational facility. I mean, I know she does that, but I
She,
think she would
the
call it
kids
ag.
started,
She's ag exempt.
Okay,
as well.
and she does have rescue animal care and all that.
right, and then Vince Ramos is new recreational facilities, and why wouldn't she be?
Yeah.
Because she has people riding horses too.
So, staff, what's the definition?
Well,
The
yeah.
definition is there is no definition.
Yeah.
Therein lies the problem.
Well, okay, first of all, it has to be a not-for-profit corporation.
Okay.
First of all, I mean, that's number one. And then, I mean, I would say that, if somebody wanted to put a softball field out for the community to use and didn't charge fees for it, and it was owned by a not-for-profit corporation, that probably would be a
I
example. The main thing is it's got to be not-for-profit corporation.
Let's just say Vince Ramos, that's an easier concept for right now.
But then I was just gonna say, I would eliminate anything that had an agricultural or equestrian feature to it.
Yes.
I think the main thing is that we don't have many of these. These are typically recreational areas, adjunct to churches and things like that are in the city, where it's a nonprofit thing and they got basketball courts and all that kind of stuff.
When you assume you don't have a lot of something, all of a sudden it
Well, I
closes
mean,
the door.
that are not agriculture, that are not tagged to agriculture is what I'm trying to say. The only thing close would be the Lochahatchee Groves Park.
Really?
But it's state owned,
Yeah, yeah.
or county or
And
whatever.
that's in a different.
So how would you like to define a nonprofit community recreational facility? Mr. Ryan was giving the definition, but then I said, well, I was concerned about the equestrian component of it. So Mr. Ryan?
Well, equestrian doesn't automatically mean ag. I mean, Vince Ramos is
Nonprofit.
it's a nonprofit, but it's for rehabilitation purposes rather than,
Recreation.
yeah.
So by giving them a potentially high-impact special exception, what are we putting them through? A great deal, are we not?
Well, not if we have a conceptual use plan. I'll be honest with you, I was surprised at the extent of that covered facility they put up. I mean, that's so out of character, you know, with anything around there, that if it didn't get a special exception, that's the kind of thing that I would have thought, even with all the good that they do, would have gotten a close look and a town council approval before they finalized that. Because it, you know, I mean, that to me is just out of character. Now, related to that, you know, the other out of character thing that appeared over the years, way before your time, is that irrigation warehouse at the corner of B and Okeechobee. I mean, they've planted a few plants in front and call it a nursery, but it's anything but that. So
Or they paved everything over?
you know, it's the kind of thing that, even though, you know, I think everybody would cut Vince Ramos a lot of slack because of the good that they do and their overall acceptable purpose, that facility they put up is different from anything else that I've seen in the groves, except for maybe that warehouse for the irrigation down
Well,
B Road.
The biggest problem I have with something like this is, number one, it's called out specifically, I mean, and it's special exception use. So the drafters of the ordinance obviously had something in mind, but they didn't share it with us. Because, you know, following Jim's, you know, it's got to be nonprofit, it's got to be a recreational facility, and they throw the word community. I would agree with you on Vince Ramos, but yet somebody could look at Vince Ramos and say, that's not necessarily for the community, that's for a specific targeted population.
To me, they almost
So-
look more institutional.
Community tells me it was meant to be something more.
Did anybody in the community?
Yes, exactly. So, for something like that, that really needs to be defined. I think one of the recommendations I would give you is that, you know, you're gonna keep that in that current form. I think we need to have a definition, or at least try to, or change the nomenclature there, but.
Is there anything else on that table that we need a definition of?
Wireless communication facilities.
A-road?
Tower.
That's a tower.
Well,
That's a
cell tower.
tower.
We have, I bet you 25% of our ULDC is regulations on wireless, on cell towers.
I don't see how they're category A. They put it up and we don't have people going there all the time.
You don't have people going there all the time, but it's
Heavily
It's
electric,
big.
heavy regulation.
yeah. It's-
FCC, everything.
It's tall, people don't want it next to them. There are regulations about, fall zones and
Yeah, whether you have guide wires, or whether you have a collapsing tower. or
So
all that
what you mean by high impact is how it can affect, it has nothing to do with traffic or anything like that.
Well,
That
yes,
has a high
traffic is
hazard
one thing,
level
but
to
traffic
it,
is not the
too.
only, traffic's not the only consideration.
I think when the town was formed and the whole code was developed, it was mainly focused on impact on your neighbor.
Yeah.
And that obviously had an impact on,
And the way most jurisdictions handle that is they usually try to move these things into the jurisdiction's own lands, which we have none. Because what they use it as a moneymaker. They throw it in their parks, and they put it in other areas, and then they derive some of the revenue from it. They do co-location, they do all that stuff. But we're not there.
It's definitions.
Yeah. Is there any other thing in that list
Yes.
that we need to define?
Yes.
Okay.
You just opened it up from what I brought up before.
Well, no, I'm talking about table 2.
Yeah, I understand that. Oh, table 1 or
No,
table
table
2?
Table 2.
Just flip the page.
Table 2 is,
While he's
table
looking,
2 is my
Oh,
recommendation.
table 2, okay. What needs defined?
Yes.
okay,
Okay, mobile home is improperly defined. Okay, if you look at 23 of 40, based upon the above key characteristics is where the paragraph starts. Now, if you read that paragraph entirely, you got to change some wording in there. Because it says, any structure without all of these characteristics is not a mobile home. And the characteristics include heat and air conditioning. And you don't need a heater in a mobile home in Florida. I lived in one for 15 years that didn't have a heater.
So that's a suggestion to
So-
eliminate the word heating.
We need to change the definition of mobile home, because with the way you have it, you can eliminate your heater, you can eliminate, or your air conditioner, and say, hey, it's not a mobile home. It says right here, any structure without all of these characteristics.
It would be a
The
container.
definition is faulty.
Yeah, okay.
That, I would agree with Howard, because mobile homes came up several times during the discussion of the code, because there was a general reluctance to encourage mobile homes as permanent dwelling units. The county allowed an exception of a mobile home for a year while a permanent residence was being built. But I think that we've got issues out here where I know of instances where people are bunching mobile homes on a property to rent out to ag workers. And, to me, that's just not something.
And I'll guarantee you, most of them don't have a heater.
Right.
And I've even watched them switched out in the middle of the night. The old mobile home switched out for a slightly less old mobile home.
I mean, I do think that the mobile home definition is important to a lot of people in terms of the way the code was originally developed and how we're going to operate with it. Because there are a lot of instances where, I think some people, have mobile homes on their property for either their elderly parents or their young children that haven't found a job and aren't independent yet.
Sure.
Are you suggesting we need a revised definition?
Yes, I agree with Howard that definition needs to be.
Well, I think that, I mean, as Mark stated earlier, there's a lot of definition issues in the code. And I certainly don't see anything wrong with, as we go through these specific topics. If we come up with definitions that need to be worked on, let's work on them at that time.
Well, like Howard pointed out, any structure without all of these characteristics would not be classified as a mobile home. And only a structure meeting these characteristics would be determined to be the principal use of the property would need special exception approval on each.
Yeah, okay, well, that was sort of my interpretation of the definition as opposed to what the definition actually is. And let me look at that and I'll come back.
Right over here.
Next. Yeah. What page is that?
Or if we have
20 or 40, fourth paragraph down, looks like you took the definition 10 more times. Mobile home for what is
Mark, we have Mr. Klein would like to make a comment.
I have a question for you, Madam Chair, and the board. And it's basically what you're gathered to review the ULDCs. And from what I understand, ULDCs are basically taken from the county code and sort of tailored by a group of people to meet certain objectives that were understood by the group that tailored these ULDCs. And I'm wondering, thematically, what are you tailoring them against? Or what are you working with the strategic planning document in terms of what you feel the people of the town want to tailor the ULDCs? Thematically, what is going on?
That's a very good question.
So, as a planning and zoning board member, I'm tortured by this all the time, but I really want to.
What we had discussed in the, I don't think you were
And
here
you're
at the
starting
very
in the
beginning.
middle, you're starting actually somewhere in the middle of the document, not you're starting at the beginning and
Right.
laboriously working your way through to the end. So I'm,
Well, were you here at the very beginning, or you
No,
came in?
I
Okay,
hadn't
well, we
listened to
discussed
this.
several points, and just to reiterate several points where we've asked for Jim to give us the link to the original Palm Beach County ULDCs, so we can use that as a reference. We've asked for anything that comes before, and of course, in the beginning, I brought up the Attorney General letter, as we've discussed, and Mr. Cutney is going to meet with Mr. Cirillo and then give us input. We're not touching anything that relates to ag. We're staying away from that till we get the opinion. And yes, we are, as was discussed, we're not starting from the beginning because the town council has selected specific topics for us to review. So the town council is basically directing us as to what we need to be reviewing. We have asked, Mr. Ryan made a point tonight that as
Did
an
you ask
example.
why?
Pardon?
Did you ask why?
I always ask why, I never get answers.
Please, anyone.
Howard can comment, but I wanted to make the point that Mr. Ryan also brought up a point that, as an example, Section 80 was not provided to us to reference to where we're going to get that. Information is missing, we've asked for it, so if something's missing, we will ask for the proper ULDC to refer to, and it was emphasized to us that this does go to the planning and zoning. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah.
Okay, since the ULDC has been enacted and it's been worked with, there are a lot of issues that have come up where it doesn't make sense, where what the hoops you have to jump through in order to do something simple are ridiculously complicated or expensive. There are things that are in conflict with one another, and so all those issues that have come up since the passage of the ULDC up until now are the first things we're being asked to address in order to eliminate them, change the wording of them, or make them non-conflictive with other things that are in the ULDC. The first areas we're going to, which is why it's appearing we're jumping all over willy-nilly. We're basically being asked to handle those problem areas where nobody can figure out what to do because there's conflicting things in the documents.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, following that up, one of the areas that was important in the formation of the town and the code was how do we deal with existing businesses that were here before the town was formed. And I think that both topics tonight dealt with existing businesses and special exceptions and the process. And most of the existing businesses have not gone through the process because the process has been suspended. So I think getting the special exception recommendations organized to the point where they can be recommended to the town council and the planning and zoning board for further review, and in the background, knowing that we have several businesses out here that nobody wanted to say they're automatically grandfathered, but if they would meet the requirements of being acceptable to their neighbors and not a nuisance in terms of noise or other things that are legitimate concerns. And I think light during the evening was one, some others. Trying to get that information under these special exceptions is probably the broadest first topic, you know, that would really deal with a lot of things that have been problems with our experience with the code.
I understand the technical, I can appreciate that, and the follow-on would be to you, John, in the sense that you're looking through the prism of ULDCs that come from the county, which is sort of standard planning and zoning practices for a wide variety of towns and villages. It seems, though, that the nature of Loxahatchee Groves is a lot of very different and varied types of people doing different things, so that when you look at it through that prism, a lot of those people would be non-conforming per standard zoning planning practices.
Right, but Larry, the fact was that that's what we had all those workshops and what the town council people at that time really struggled through was
Right.
trying to say, we don't want, I mean, automatically we had to inherit the county code as a starting point, but that all those workshops and all that effort that the town council went through was to try and
Are you
adapt
referring to
them.
Calvin Giordano?
Well, a combination of the
No.
consultant, I forget the lady's name,
Melvin and Associates.
Melbourne and
Michelle
Associates.
Melbourne.
But her task,
Michelle Melbourne.
Melbourne,
She wrote the code.
Oh, code, I thought you were talking about the workshops and whatnot. I'm
well,
sorry.
no, we actually, I mean, the workshops on the code, you know, we had workshops where Michelle Melbourne was there to get the input from the public and the town council members, and we divided into groups to deal with certain aspects of the code. I mean, the whole effort was to adapt the county. It's not like we're saying, we're looking at our code through the prism of the county code at this point in time. Hopefully,
Because you feel
we
you
started out, we already
customized
did
it.
that.
You customized it.
We're, to some extent,
To some
now we're
extent.
finding that there's some glitches in the customizing.
Mhm.
There's also trying to eliminate the prism of Michelle Melgren.
Okay.
Okay, because I went to a lot of these
Fair
workshops
enough.
and sat around table discussions, and then what she wrote had absolutely nothing to do with what anybody was saying. It was the way she interpreted it. And you know, so there was a lot that went on like that, and that's why we're here.
Did you use the documents done by Calvin Giordano in the previous document, which Calvin Giordano referred to in the last 2 pages of their 10-page document in the formation of the ULDCs?
You talking about the new plan?
Yes, the strategic plan. As part of, as.
You know, to me, that's what the process that we went through attempted to do, was to take a combination of the vision and the Palm Beach County Code and adapt it to the circumstances as people knew them
Mhm.
in Loxahatchee Groves. And Michelle Melgren was our scribe.
Okay.
And, you know, beyond Michelle Melgren, a combination of Doreen Baxter and Dennis really paid a lot of attention to the way that they wanted the wording presented, and it was discussed pro and con, and we came up with a product, and now we're reviewing key sections of that product. And special exceptions, I think, is one that has been an issue in many ways.
Okay, so
Thank you.
if we could get back to the table then, and I think Jim,
Yeah.
because we are, as everyone knows, we passed the two and a half hour mark here. That we were supposed to make a comment when it's 2 hours, okay, it's 2 hours, 25 minutes. And let's focus on this table. And I wanted to bring up, I'm sorry, Beth, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna come back to that nonprofit community recreational
Okay.
facility. To me, it's very specific. Can we just make it a nonprofit facility? It's already kind of defined within the AR district.
Because you can't have a nonprofit facility being a special exception all the time.
Gosh, okay, you're right, I'm done, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, as an example, and let's go back to a nonprofit community recreational facility. We brought up Mesa Ramos, it's not a community facility, although it is open to a community, it serves a specific group of the community. So let's just start with that. Are we saying that this should be 2 separate definitions?
I don't know, I
I don't think there's anything wrong with it, there's nothing wrong with the definition. It's just that we're trying to cubbyhole something that's already here into it, and I don't think something that's in the community fits into it. So just because there are none doesn't mean it shouldn't be there. I honestly don't think there are any,
I would agree.
and that's not a bad thing.
Well, let's flip it to the other side. If something should come up like this, in the ULDCs, what do you have to work with if something comes up that is not already listed in the ULDC? Say if this was removed, but then it comes up, it appears.
But you don't remove it, you leave it there, in case something does come up.
So we need to define what it is.
Yeah,
when it
here's
comes
how-
up, we know what it is.
Yeah, we'll come up with a definition, a proposed definition for that, and we'll also come up with a proposed revised definition for
And
that.
again, then you're considering that a high impact, you're considering something like this would be high impact on the community, and should go through a rigorous,
Well, don't forget, the high impact is not necessarily
That's the
what you're
traffic,
thinking of in
the-
terms of traffic, and, you know, it can be of concern that this operation, if not done correctly, could be a problem noise-wise, could be a problem light-wise, could be a problem traffic-wise. So the idea of high impact, and maybe that's not a good term, maybe it's requiring review, or, you know, I mean, you know, it's, the idea is just to look at anything that could have an impact on neighbors or an impact on the community. And I think as that definition said, to ensure that they're appropriate for the location. And it's not necessarily that they are by definition all high impact adverse. It's just that no one wants that use to become high impact adverse, and this review in some conditions may deal with that, may address that concern.
Yeah, and I mean, and if a use comes through that falls in our definition of nonprofit community recreational facility, and it comes in with a proposal that, where the impacts really are not that high, we can still minimize the review process by the manager's ability to waive requirements for site plan and things like that. So the process is fluid to a certain extent, depending upon the exact nature of the proposed use.
Just again, because Gooder keeps coming to my
I mean,
mind. when I hear
high
that.
impact doesn't necessarily mean adverse impact.
Oh, I understand that.
Now, a perfect example would be if any one of the innumerable churches on Okeechobee Boulevard decided to buy the 10 acres or the 20 acres next door to it and put in a community basketball court, volleyball court, and what have you for the entire community to use. You would in effect have exactly that. It would be high impact because there'd be a lot of traffic in and out, but it wouldn't be an adverse impact. And so that definition would already be there in case something like that happened.
But to me, that's institutional and public facilities.
But it's not.
Because again, it goes back to the
Okay,
zoning.
so
If you have a nonprofit
are we-
community recreation facility on an agricultural deal, to me, it's like a writing and like a posse ground.
Let me offer some observations and see if we can. First of all, we don't have a lot of uses identified here in special exception uses, what, 20, 25 tops maybe. But I really do feel strongly that each one of them ought to be defined, out of the definition in the code. Now, I think, Madam Chair, you asked, how do you determine what something is when you come in? And it is troublesome. We get, believe it or not, we get a lot of requests from people where a use is not necessarily defined or is indicated in the code, and we try to figure out what it is. And the thing we use for that is the standard classification manual. It used to be put out by the federal government. Now it's called the North American Classification System. But basically, it's a very large book that identifies pretty much every use, every industry known to man, and kind of gives you some of the definitions and how they're classified. So we do have some tools to do that, but we shouldn't have to do that all the time. We should be able to go to a list and find them. I think, excuse me, I think probably no action should be taken tonight. I think we've had a very good discussion on this, but I think some of the things we got to think about are, number one, do you like that system that Jim put together as far as the high impact and low impact, or do we want to go with another system? I think maybe at the next meeting we want to come back with, what kind of terms do you want to define? I think these are the kind of things we need to get to so that we can then give that recommendation on the town council as to what we got to do with this section.
I would like, let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt. I would like a clear explanation, because again, my understanding is high impact, low impact is your interpretation of what they mean, correct?
No, we're saying, we're sort of taking that decision out of the administrative realm by saying, okay, if you are this use, we're going to put you in the high impact category.
And my point is, I would like a little bit in writing what high impact, low impact refers to in the definition section.
Would it be more palatable if you change the verbiage to potentially high impact?
Well, that's exactly what I have on page 26 and 40 at the top here. Category A is potential high impact.
Yes, sir.
Right. And now
Category B
it
is
says,
potential low impact.
Mr. Ryan had a question.
The other way that we can handle that is if there's a use that's in the high impact category, and it comes in with a specific proposal, sit down with staff, and staff determines that, well, okay, it really isn't high impact, we're going to put it in category B, but that, in my mind, opens up a potential can of worms. It puts a lot of pressure on staff. We shouldn't do that, but I think we need to have as much black and white here in terms of what category a project will go in as possible. To take that interpretation out of the hands of staff.
Right,
Okay,
and to
if
that,
you're this, you're potential high.
Yes, and that's exactly my point. If we're gonna put something in potential high, I'd like to know what the variables are that make them potential high or potential low.
Well, we,
I mean,
we
is
can
it
give you,
subjective?
we can give you a list of items that we would look at.
That's all, just
But we
variables.
can't give you thresholds necessarily.
No, I understand that. If we could just at least have the variables that define high impact, low impact, that would be beneficial.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Jim attempted to do that on page 25 or 40, or at least he had a paragraph in there. Categorize special exception uses based on its potential impact on neighboring properties, including traffic generation, environmental concerns, hours of operation, compatibility. I mean, you know, you could add lighting, noise, you know, other nuisances.
You add a size of development.
And high impact, low impact is not a good term, because people can badly misunderstand that. You know, you almost want to say, you know, this category requires a full review, and
It's almost
the
like
other one
nature of
requires
Well,
well,
there's certainly,
you know, make it a little more palatable.
yeah, there's no pride of authorship in terms of what we call these categories.
But I think responding to Virginia, if you expanded on that paragraph on page 25 or 40, that might be a help.
Okay.
That's letter C.
Pretty
You
good.
see that on 25 or 40, I'm sorry.
It's under C, it's
Okay.
the second paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe this will help your review of this whole thing. On page 25 of 40, I have four basic recommendations, starting with C1. One is to create special exception categories. Okay, that's what I get tempted to do in table 2. Over on the next page, the second recommendation is to simplify the special exception application. And then on the next page, I have 5 items that I think will help to simplify the application process. The third recommendation is to revise the public notice requirements, making them simpler and less expensive for certain of the special exception types, categories. And then number 4 is the specific code revisions to implement those recommendations that start on page 28. So if you concentrate on pages 25 of 40 through 32 of 40, 33 of 40, 25 through 33, those 8 pages are essentially my recommendations. So,
And in addition to, yes, and in addition to the feedback we get again
yeah.
from Cirillo will be very important.
And,
Is it 25 through 30?
33. Those are my recommendations. Those are staff recommendations. And in addition to that, I guess when we come back next time, we will work on a definition for nonprofit community recreation facility, mobile home, and expand what we mean by the impacts.
And at this point too, I'd like to discuss outdoor events, because as an example, we will take, oh, sorry, go ahead.
If I could just make a recommendation in general that I think will make a lot of these sections easier, is if there are other agencies or other areas that are responsible for taking care of something, that we don't have to have it in the ULDCs. That's one of the ways that the acreage actually worked through some of the issues recently with the county, is that if there are other agencies that would take care of, you know, animal type of issues, then we didn't need to have it in the ULDCs. If there are areas that address noise in general, then maybe we don't need to have it elsewhere because it's already being taken care of. And so there are a couple of things when you're talking high impact, low impact. If we are addressing them by not allowing a certain amount of noise or light and we're not giving them special permission via that vehicle to be above that level, then we've already taken care of it. And we don't need to complicate the ULDCs any further. And that way you can be a little less restrictive.
Well, that's what the codes are all about.
Yes,
I mean,
but,
that's why they're in here.
yes, but you are addressing them in certain areas. We're saying that you know, when you're having an event, what the noise level is allowed to be in general, then it wouldn't be any different for an event, so you don't.
We have a noise ordinance, what you're saying is we have an existing noise ordinance.
So
So
they're all code enforced. I mean, that's the whole theory.
Right, but there's a section for that. You don't need to keep regurgitating it at every single spot.
Okay. On the special exception use, something I don't see on here, and something I do. A specific one that's been the topic in this town lately, where would something like a private property having a motocross facility or private use come into it?
Motocross?
Yeah,
Well, first of all, I'm assuming that would be a commercial business.
no, this is, apparently they don't charge, it's private use, but it has a high impact upon the neighbors.
It's, they don't charge for it?
No, it's friends
No.
and family.
Okay, well, I mean, that could fall under the nonprofit community
It's-
recreational facility.
It's not, no, nonprofit, you have to be an official nonprofit. This is when we look at high impact and low impact, and we talk about how it affects our neighbors or our environment, things like that. It comes to mind because it's a fresh topic in the community. So you have a private, if I am a private resident and I want to bring in all this dirt, and I want to have all this activity, one, I know it violates the noise ordinance. I know that. It's just documenting it and consistently documenting it. But is that something that requires a special exception? I mean, that's,
So violating the noise ordinance, that ought to result in some
Well,
buffering or some fines or.
well, unless it fell under the definition of nonprofit community recreation facility or outdoor event.
Do we have a traditional customary language for accessory use?
so that's what I'm thinking, it has to be something.
Well,
See, I'm thinking the answer to your question may lie in the fact that generally with accessory uses, there's language that talks about, for example, if you have a 5-acre home site, you have a home, accessory uses you're allowed to have are those traditional and customary to the principal use being the residential structure. A motocross course or elements of it developed on your property is not generally something that's traditional and customary to a home. So maybe you would look at it from an enforcement standpoint that way, as opposed to putting it into a special exception category and giving it credence in the code that way. That's something we'd have to look at. I mean, you know, I know we have it, I know it's an issue on a couple of properties.
Okay, so to address the point, it's perhaps not a special exception issue, but in some people's mind, it might be. You know, you might need a special exception to have something.
But you're breaking new ground here that is important, because I think
Right,
you're going to
that
have
is-
issues like that.
That is
as
my
you
point.
live with it.
It may be something that you're saying could be covered elsewhere. I'd like to know, if
Well-
Jim, next time you come back, if you could let us know where it would be covered, and if not, we need to discuss if it should be a special exception.
well, I think what you're asking is, now can they do it, period? I mean, is that something that
Yeah, I'm
the code
saying
allows
maybe not
at
be
all? And it may
Right,
not,
that's-
it may not be.
My question is, what is in our code regarding a private residence having that kind of setup? Is there something in the code? If not, do we need to make a special exception?
Or put it in the code.
Put it in
Motocross
That's
facility.
a very good point. Yeah. It's right on point.
Going on definitions of outdoor
the events.
events. But it goes back to my original question, you can't have a birthday party. I mean, if you decide to have your 50th birthday party and you invite 100 of your closest friends and you live on 5 acres, you're showing up for one day, you have a big party, at 10 p.m. everybody goes home. Your neighbors are invited, nobody cares that you're doing it. You gotta go get a permit to go have a,
But they can't take the tent down to the next day.
I don't think that's what an outdoor event was meant to be. I mean, if you're gonna have a 50th birthday party, and you're gonna have
but
tons of relatives and friends. I think what generally what outdoor events are things that are sanctioned by some entity, and they're using it to have people come in where they might pay a fee or do something. That's usually what, like a carnival, special carnival, those kinds of things. They're usually what you think of in terms of the outdoor events, not a private party.
so can we define that as an outdoor commercial?
It is defined, isn't it defined in here, outdoor event?
Yes.
It does say.
Look, we read you the definition of outdoor event, and depending upon how you read it, your birthday party might be one.
Depending on what you
A
spend.
carnival, circus, concert, festival, commercial promotion, show, competition, sale, and other similar types of events, as well as any outdoor activity that is not a permitted principal or accessory outdoor use of the premises shall be classified as an outdoor event.
See, I wouldn't view a birthday party as falling in that. That's my opinion.
Excuse me? Another question. I'm getting a little bit confused here. You're talking about special exemptions or events? Because it's two complete different things.
No, because you have to get a special exemption for the
You
event.
have to get a special permit for an event, but a special exemption, it's like the exemption, it's more like for the type of use you're doing to the property.
Continual use.
Continual.
Yeah, his example he just
It's
gave,
not an exemption, it's an
It's exception.
exception.
right, special.
Well, English is my second language, I meant to say that. Sorry.
Okay, but your point is well taken. I mean, a lot of jurisdictions do not classify outdoor events as special exceptions. They treat them differently as a special use,
Special
temporary
events,
use.
yeah, it's like a
And that's
special
something we may want to look at.
That is something we
Yeah,
need.
and that's essentially what my recommendation does. It classifies them as category C. And if you can certify that you're not going to be doing any of these 6 things, you don't need a permit at all.
Right, but as we,
So that clarifies what you're talking about.
but let me say this, for some birthday parties, people like to have the tents come, just for some parties, you might want to have a big tent, and the caterers can't come out to take it down till the next day.
Well,
Do it on Saturday and Sunday and nobody will.
yeah.
Yeah, but if I'm code enforcement, it's here.
But
Welcome
the
to Los
holidays,
Angeles.
the holidays, if you have a holiday party during the week,
Well, just do it over Christmas, they're not gonna work
But
that
no,
day either.
seriously, because some people, because unfortunately I bring this up, because some people like to be very vindictive and file complaints. They know you're having something during the, it sounds funny, but it's a very serious issue that we don't want costing people a lot of money, just because they try to have a simple party and have something catered perhaps and throw up a tent. And I see that tent issue. I'm not gonna ask about the wind load calculation and the permit required, okay, for a residence. But I'm just saying,
Well,
let's keep it simple.
Yeah, we have 6 things in here that you have to certify to. No overnight signage, no overnight buildings, tents, or similar structures, no electrical, plumbing, or similar utility connections, no proposed sanitary facilities. Facilities must be currently available on site. No overnight parking, trash and garbage shall be policed and removed daily.
Right, so
Okay.
somebody wants to have a party and have a band.
Okay, well, we can, I mean, if the board wants to take one of those out of that list,
We can take it out.
Couldn't we
That's
just
what I'm
I
put,
recommend that it be taken out.
couldn't we just eliminate overnight and put not for more than 24 hours?
Exactly.
Or
The time
48
limit.
hours.
48
You don't wanna send your friends home drunk.
Right, exactly.
They can't leave their party.
John,
24 hours.
John,
Yeah.
48.
I'll tell you, one thing that I've had a discussion with DBSO on, not because I brought it up, it was because they brought it up. We evidently had a plot of land leased out to a religious organization where they butchered 200 animals
Yes.
over a couple of day period. I mean, that was something that, I think we ought to, I know you have trouble regulating religious organizations, but to me, that's not something I'd like to encourage, if that can be avoided.
That would be animal control or animal cruelty that would take care of that. That's what Nina was referring to earlier.
After the
We don't
fact.
need to put ordinances that already another agency is taking care of.
Well, it's not cruelty if it's a religious,
Yeah, that was a religious thing.
it was a religious
And
thing.
again, we can't let ourselves be fear-driven either. If we're afraid of absolutely everything, we really can't, get out of our bubble at that point. We do need to kind of
I think the
worry more
definition,
about the
at the
regular people
extremes, we
instead of
certainly don't want to
operating,
prevent birthday
worried about.
parties. The other extreme, if there's a way to control the religious events so that we don't encourage activities that, you know, are objectionable to neighbors and the community at large.
And the point there, if you take the religion out of that, that's a butchering operation. That's not, you take the religion out, that is a butchering operation. And I don't think butchering is permitted in, not for public consumption in our jurisdiction.
But there's state laws, state and federal laws that already protect all that.
I think we need to review if there are before we assume
Oh,
there are.
I studied that and I'd look
Well,
at
if
the
you
year,
could-
but it is the Federal Humane Slaughter Act of 1934 or
But,
something.
you know, it would be great back then if you could.
I will be more than
bring
able
it
to
in,
find it.
Bring it in.
Because
Excuse
it
me?
exists.
I have another question. They were just killing the animals, or they were killing them to eat them?
I think they were killing them to eat them, but it was a religious ceremony where they just butchered.
They claimed it was
I think
religious
they
ceremony.
shot them in the head and chopped them up. Sacrifice.
Well, but I mean, that happens every day, everywhere. I mean, cows get killed to be
In a
eaten. I mean, if
slaughterhouse
it's
or in a commercial zone, but not
Right.
necessarily in an ag res
in any farm
Yes.
also.
area.
The purpose, it was acting as a commercial slaughterhouse, which is not permitted in our area, I believe. And that's what we need to refine in the code.
Well, then I better be careful next time I kill a pig to eat it.
For your personal consumption is, for your personal.
That's farming, it's part of,
No, your personal consumption is acceptable. I've had livestock, I've had butchered for my own personal consumption. When you are bringing in livestock for the public, that you are having, there are guys, Beck will tell you,
None of
there's
these were
guidelines
residents.
that issue.
1958.
Right, and we just need to confirm we have the information, and we don't need to deal with it so that PBSO has the information also.
It's the 1958 federal law.
Madam Chair, it's 10,
Yes,
and
sir.
how much longer the board wants to go, but let me please make some suggestions for our next meeting, because I think the agenda is shaping up pretty well. What we're gonna do is, obviously, we didn't get to the non-conforming tonight, I would recommend that we hold both these items over to the next meeting. What I'm gonna do is, I will check with Mr. Cirillo's schedule, I think we should put the AGO on, so we can address that issue. And the only other thing I would add on, that's a lot on your plate, I won't be starting with those items, but I would also suggest that we talk about and we add the definition section, because that's going to be critical for everything that you discuss throughout this entire process. So I think that would be enough of an agenda, but I think it's going to be a very good agenda, and hopefully then we can, you know, make it more ground up on the special session. You'll have more time to look at it. We'll, again, you know, we'll refine what we've talked about, and we'll try to go from there.
And
And remember, we're starting at 5, so.
Right, and as I've said throughout from the beginning of this meeting, Mark, I'm very concerned about the Florida statutes, the Right to Farm Act, and how this opinion affects what we can touch. Because I don't want any problems with Florida, us contradicting Florida statutes.
Right, right. Understand.
motion to adjourn?
Second.
Well, we should have taken
Aye.
comments, I guess, but
Just to know, we're going to add, we'll add a comment at the end, and we'll add a comment as we go through the items, so that right after ours, and we'll give you the public comments that we received here, we'll cover those, and then those are. Is that right? You get it right?